Chapter 1. The sun sank below the horizon, bathing the land in inky darkness. For the humans of Luminescent City, it was a time to light lamps and lock doors as night predators emerged. But for the vampires of Nocturne Realm, the dark was a time of awakening. Vyre stretched his arms as the last sliver of light disappeared from the sky. He had just awakened after a day's sleep and was ready to start his night. As a vampire warrior who trained at the prestigious Nocturne Academy, the 18-year-old was tasked with guarding the borders of the vampire realm and protecting his people. Vyre lived in a cave dormitory on the academy grounds with 4 other trainees. At the sound of a bell echoing through the caverns, his roommates began to stir. "Rise and shine, bloodsuckers," bellowed Brom, the loudest and brashest of the group. The stocky, dark-haired vampire was first out of his granite coffin, sarcophagus-style bed. Lithe, red-headed Cain was next to emerge, his green eyes already alert. "Must you always be so loud, Brom?" he said with a scowl. "Oh, don't be so grumpy," teased Vyre. "The night awaits." The others were soon up and dressed. Vyre pulled on his lightweight black armor emblazoned with the Academy's raven crest over a sleeveless grey tunic and black pants. He strapped on his boots and sheathed his sword Nightslayer, the trusted obsidian weapon given to him by his father. His short dark hair neatly framed his pale face, with its angled features, straight nose, and sculpted lips. Ready for the evening, the 5 comrades headed to the training cavern. The massive natural cavern had been expanded over generations into an underground training facility for the vampire warriors. Weapon racks lined the stone walls. Training dummies made of straw and cloth stood in regimental rows across the smooth-swept floor. High above, the cavern ceiling was lost in darkness. The warriors began their training with meditation and focused breathing. Simple warmth-up exercises followed: sprints, shadowboxing, tumbling routines. Then came the more vigorous combat drills. Tonight their training master, Sir Ulrich, had them working on their dual-wielding skills. The vampires paired off for intense one-on-one training with sword and dagger. Vyre faced Cain, blades flashing in the torchlight as they danced and spun. Vyre flowed from one offensive form to the next, mixing up high and low attacks. Cain met him with equal intensity, blocking and countering. They traded minor cuts and bruises, their enhanced vampire healing erasing each injury. After 90 minutes of drills, Sir Ulrich called them in for notes and feedback. He commended Vyre and Cain for their excellent footwork and body positioning. "Remember to vary the timing and pacing of your attacks," Ulrich said. "Throw your opponent off balance by being unpredictable." The group took a short break, sipping extra iron-enriched vampire wine to re-energize. Then it was time for stealth training. One warrior would track and hunt the others through a dark, twisting maze of caverns as they tried to evade their pursuer. Tonight was Vyre's turn to be the tracker. He closed his eyes and extended his senses, filtering out the heartbeats of his friends until the cavern was silent. At Ulrich's signal, he sprang forward on bare feet, as silent as a cat. Through a series of dark, winding tunnels he pursued, relying on hearing and scent until finally cornering Brom in a shadowy crevice. After everyone had a turn, the warriors headed upstairs to the martial arts arena for intense hand-to-hand sparring. Vyre was paired against Petra, a tall, muscular girl with braided amber hair. They crashed together again and again, blocking kicks and jabbing for pressure points. Vyre managed to lift Petra and flip her onto the mat. She rebounded swiftly, and Vyre had to use all his speed to counter her whirlwind of roundhouse kicks. They bowed respectfully to each other at the end of the match. The night's training complete, the weary but satisfied warriors headed to the dining hall to feed. The hall was filled with carved wooden tables and benches, where students mingled and talked amidst the clatter of goblets and plates. Great fireplaces along the walls bathed the room in warmth and light. At the head table sat Lord Nocturne, the ancient master vampire who had founded the academy a millennium ago. His long white hair and beard flowed over his black robes. Vyre filled his plate from the bounty along the feast tables. There was smoked boar, roasted night fowl, rabbit stew, candied insects, mushrooms stewed in blood, and jars of freshly drained animal blood, deer, sheep, and ox. He sat with his friends, laughing and chatting as they ate. Vyre always felt at home here in the camaraderie of his fellow warriors. He had lost both parents to a deadly virus, and been raised at the academy since he was 12. These vampires were the only family he knew. After dinner came Vyre's favorite time, guard duty along the border between the human and vampire realms. Ever since a long and bloody war had ended in an uneasy truce between the two races, vampire activity was barred in the human cities, and humans could not enter the vampire lands. Only sanctioned envoys could cross between. This was done to prevent carnage by the Deadclaws, terrifying creatures of darkness that hunted vampires with ravenous hunger. Humans were safe from them, but they slaughtered any vampires in their path. Lord Noctum had created the academy to train vampire warriors capable of holding them off. So the lands remained separated. Vyre headed out with Brom into the shadowy wilderness along the border. The forest was filled with nocturnal sounds: owls hooting, bats fluttering through the trees, the howling of wolves. The pair stealthily tracked through the underbrush, senses alert for any signs of Deadclaws emerging from their nests in the dark heart of the forest. All seemed tranquil tonight, aside from the normal sounds of the night time. Vyre paused, leaning against a towering oak and gazing at the stars through its branches. He began to daydream what the human lands must be like, with their bustling cities, cheerful daylight culture, and plazas full of art and music. What would it be like to walk through a human city openly, Vyre wondered. To see the creatures who were so much weaker physically than vampires, yet led such vibrant and creative lives. Lost in thought, Vyre was startled back to alertness by a warning hiss from Brom. Whirling around, he saw 3 creeping forms stalking from the underbrush. Deadclaws. The pair drew their swords in unison. Brom took the first beast head-on, deflecting its razor claws with his shield, then slashing its throat in a spray of black blood. Vyre spun and sliced the legs out from under the second creature, then stabbed down through its back while it was prone. The third Deadclaw was more cunning, feinting from side to side as it closed in. Vyre dodged its slashing attacks. He managed to score a glancing blow along its ribs, but the thing was shockingly fast. Vyre had to cry out as the Deadclaw raked its claws along his shoulder, shredding his armor. Brom tackled the creature before it could strike again, both tumbling to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Brom finally gained the upper hand and crushed the thing's windpipe with his boot. Vyre leaned against a tree, catching his breath as his wound rapidly healed. "Well fought, brother," he said to Brom with a grin. They clasped forearms. "This night is not over yet," cautioned Brom, pointing ahead. Heart sinking, Vyre saw several more Deadclaws creeping from their lair toward the border, drawn by the commotion. "For Lord Noctum," the pair shouted, lifting their swords and charging to meet the fiendish creatures. They fought ferociously, blades singing as they slashed and parried the Deadclaws' lethal claws. Together they drove the attackers back toward the nest entrance. More Deadclaws flooded out, and Vyre knew they were badly outnumbered now. He fought on with determination, ducking under swipes and delivering fatal counter-blows. Suddenly a horn sounded, echoing through the woods, the signal for retreat. Vyre and Brom swiftly disengaged from the remaining Deadclaws and sprinted back toward the academy. Fresh teams of warriors rushed past them to hold the nest at bay. Safe back in the torchlit cavern entrance, Vyre and Brom got their wounds tended to by the academy's healers. Luckily the cuts were already closing on their own. Lord Noctum himself approached the weary warriors. "You both fought valiantly tonight," he said, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "Our realm endures because of your courage and sacrifice. Now get some rest." The two friends stumbled off to their cave to sleep through the day. Vyre's mind was plagued by nightmares of the Deadclaws' snarling faces and razor claws as he slipped into slumber. But he also dreamed of shimmering human cities filled with light and laughter, so unlike the world he knew. One day, he vowed silently before sleep claimed him, one day he would see that world for himself. And so began another night in the ceaseless, age-old struggle between vampire and deadclaw that kept the realms forever separate. Chapter 2. The next evening, Vyre awoke feeling refreshed and ready for another night of training. Donning his armor, he roused his friends from their coffin beds. "On your feet, blood bags!" Vyre shouted teasingly. "Time for some good old-fashioned pain and suffering." "Ah, his peppiness is worse than the sun," groaned Petra, crawling reluctantly out of her coffin. After a hearty breakfast of eggs fried in blood, thick slices of blood sausage, and goblets of blood orange juice, the warriors headed to the training cavern. Waiting for them was Master Cyrus, a burly weapons instructor with a bristling red beard. "Right, you slack-jawed layabouts," he barked. 10 laps around the cavern perimeter, now." The vampires rushed to obey, sprinting into the dark tunnels. Their enhanced speed and stamina allowed them to finish the 10 laps in under a minute. Regrouping in the cavern, Cyrus had them begin weapons technique drills. Vyre focused on his footwork and body rotation as he practiced the flowing dance of strikes, blocks, and lunges with his silver sword. After an hour of drills, they switched to heavy cross-training, lifting weights, sparring with battle hammers, and grappling. By the time Cyrus called for a break, Vyre was covered in sweat but buzzing with energy. He gulped down a flagon of blood-infused hydration drink. "You seem distracted today," Petra commented, sidling up next to him. She gestured to the thin scars along his shoulder where the deadclaw had clawed him last night. "Are you thinking about the battle?" Vyre hesitated. He considered confiding his forbidden curiosity about the human realm. But he held back. "It's nothing," he muttered. "Just tired still." Next was a team tracking exercise in the pine forest surrounding the academy. The warriors stalked silently between the moonlit trees, working together to surround and ambush training targets. Vyre and Cain used hand signals to coordinate their attack on a dummy soldier, striking simultaneously from both sides with jabs to vital organs. After taking down all the targets, they headed back. The final training exercise was a grueling underground obstacle course designed to test the vampire's speed, agility, and endurance. Vyre pushed himself to his limits, racing through the dark maze of caverns, dodging vicious traps and rock slides, sprinting across narrow ledges over deep chasms. At last he crawled out of a tunnel and hit the bell marking the finish line, muscles burning but head buzzing from the thrill. His teammates cheered his record time. After cleaning up, Vyre headed to the dorms to unwind before the night's guard shift. But his friends had other ideas. "Tonight, we celebrate." Brom cheered, breaking open a cask of mead he'd smuggled in. He poured foaming tankards for them all. "Celebrate what?" asked Vyre wryly. "Our bond of fellowship," said Brom, raising his drink. The others laughed and joined the toast. Vyre grinned and drank deeply. The mead was honeysweet with a kick of alcohol to warm his belly. For the next hour, the friends drank, told stories, teased each other good-naturedly and laughed till they cried. Vyre felt all his stress and cares fading away. "Enough lazing about, you rascals," came a stern voice suddenly. Sir Ulrich stood in the doorway, eyeing the open cask. "Your watch starts in 10 minutes. The reprimanded warriors scrambled out of the dorm and through the torchlit halls to the academy gates to begin their patrol. The cold night air helped clear Vyre's buzzing head. He took a deep breath, gazing out at the darkened, mysterious forest. He was partnered with Cain tonight. They set out walking the perimeter trail that circled the academy grounds, staying alert for any deadclaw activity. An owl hooted softly as it glided past on silent wings. The only other sound was the gentle wind through the trees. Tonight seemed peacefully uneventful. After 2 hours with no action, they paused by a burbling stream to take a break. Vyre idly tossed pebbles into the rippling water. The alcohol had reawakened his wanderlust about the human lands. "Cain, what do you think the human cities are like?" Vyre asked abruptly. Cain raised an eyebrow. "Why the curiosity, my friend?" Vyre shook his head. Just wondering what's beyond our borders, what their lives are like. Whether they ever think about us. Cain considered thoughtfully. I imagine their cities are bright with lamps and music at all hours. Humans cherish beauty and community. They make art, sing songs, value life and love. Vyre nodded. That matched his imaginings. Part of me wishes our kinds could truly understand each other, Cain continued. But the other part thinks our worlds are better kept separate, for both our sakes. They sat quietly for a few minutes. Then distant screams split the night, coming from the direction of the village that bordered the vampire realm. The village was inhabited by humans sanctioned to provide blood and supplies to the vampire kingdom. Vyre and Cain sprinted through the trees toward the sounds. They halted at the tree line, their hearts sinking. A horde of deadclaws was swarming through the burning village, slaughtering humans and setting buildings alight. We have to help, shouted Vyre, drawing his sword and charging forward. Cain followed on his heels. Vyre's only thought was driving the deadclaws back to protect the innocent villagers. They raced through the chaos, striking down deadclaws as screaming villagers fled every direction. Vyre pulled a young girl to safety, then turned to decapitate the deadclaw menacing her. Black blood sprayed his face. He and Cain stood back to back, fending off attackers from all sides. The other vampire warriors soon arrived, having seen the flames from the academy. Now it was a pitched battle between the races that hated each other most. Vyre lost himself in the fury of blade work, dodging claws and fangs, spinning and slashing in a dance of death. Slowly, painfully, they gained the upper hand and forced the deadclaw horde into retreat. Panting, Vyre took in the carnage surrounding them. Dozens of deadclaws lay dismembered and beheaded, but many villagers also lay lifeless in the dirt. Men, women, children. Tears of rage sprang to Vyre's eyes. This slaughter was unforgivable. Lord Noctum himself strode forth, grim-faced at the sight. Hold back your sorrow for now, he told the warriors. Tend to the living. We will honor the dead at sunrise. In the hour before dawn, Vyre helped the surviving villagers gather their loved ones for burial. He stood silently with the other warriors, heads bowed, as the first light of dawn washed across the village, honoring those they had failed to save. Raw grief blended with growing anger in his chest. He swore an oath to turn that anger against the deadclaws. They would pay. After a somber day's sleep, Vyre shared his dark thoughts with his friends as they dressed for training. Something has to change, he said fiercely. The deadclaws have only grown more vicious. If this continues, humans and vampires alike will be slaughtered. I fear you are right, said Cain. Old grudges must be set aside. We must unite against this common foe. The others murmured agreement. We shall convince Lord Noctum, pledged Bronn. The time for change has come. With his friends at his side, Vyre felt ready to take the first steps toward real peace between the realms. He only prayed it was not too late. Chapter 3. Over the next few nights, life at the academy continued as normal, training, studying vampire history and magic, standing guard along the border. But Vyre felt restless, impatient for action after the tragedy at the village. He discussed ideas with Bronn, Cain, and Petra late one night after training. We must speak with Lord Noctum soon, urged Vyre. Propose sending envoys to the human kings with a formal peace offer. It will not be that simple, cautioned Cain. Generations of fear and distrust lie between our kinds. We have to try, Petra said. Or the deadclaws will remain unchecked. At last came the night Vyre and his friends were scheduled to meet with Lord Noctum after their watch. As they set out on patrol, Vyre's mind churned with what to say. This was their chance to truly change fate. All was tranquil as Vyre and Bronn circled the border's moonlit trails. Around midnight, they paused by a burbling stream to drink and refill their canteens. The gentle hoot of a distant owl was the only sound. Until Bronn held up a hand, head tilted. Listen, he whispered. Then Vyre heard it too, voices coming closer. young and lightly laughing. From the human lands. He exchanged an alarmed glance with Brom. Seconds later, two female vampire teens emerged from a copse of trees just across the border. One had short blonde hair, the other long black tresses. They froze at the sight of Vyre and Brom in their grey guard armor. "Please don't tell," blurted the blonde, eyes wide. "We just wanted to see the human village for ourselves." "It's too dangerous," Vyre said. "Dead claws roam these woods." The brunette scoffed. "We can handle ourselves. We're one of the best illusion casters in our class." She waved a hand, and she seemed to disappear. "See," said her disembodied voice. "Return home at once," ordered Brom. "By Lord Noctum's decree, none may cross the border." The blonde's face fell in disappointment, but the brunette just laughed. "You're not the boss of us." With that, the teens darted into the woods toward the human village. Vyre's blood ran cold. He knew with dread certainty that the reckless girls would lead Deadclaws right to the vulnerable village. "We have to bring them back," he shouted. He and Brom took off racing after them. The girls had a head start, but they couldn't match the warrior's speed and stamina. Soon Vyre could hear the teens just ahead, giggling and chatting. "Halt!" he yelled after them. "Come back." He pursued them all the way to the nearby human village. The girls glanced back in surprise to see Vyre still after them. They picked up their pace, zigzagging through the moonlit dirt streets. Vyre growled in frustration, pushing himself to run faster. Suddenly Brom tackled him from behind. They tumbled to the ground as a massive dark shape sailed through the air over them, a Deadclaw. Vyre rolled to his feet, sword drawn. Brom already had his shield up, facing the circling beast. Vyre's heart sank as more creeping forms emerged from the surrounding woods. The girl's scent had drawn them. "Stand your ground," Vyre shouted to the teens cowering behind them. He slashed his sword across the first attacker's chest, then spun and sliced open another's throat. Thick Deadclaw blood splattered him as he fended off claws and fangs. The endless horde pressed in from all sides. A scream rose behind Vyre. One of the foolish girls was hauled off into the dark by a Deadclaw. Rage surged through Vyre's veins. He would not lose one more innocent life. With relentless fury he cut down the enemies in his path, trying to advance toward where the girl had been taken. Brom guarded his back, bashing Deadclaws with his shield and impaling them on his sword. Ahead, Vyre saw a Deadclaw hunched over the girl's lifeless body. With a primal roar, Vyre charged and unleashed a savage vertical strike, nearly slicing the feasting beast in two from skull to groin. It collapsed in a pile of gore. But Vyre's fury had carried him deep into the Deadclaw ranks. Now he and Brom were surrounded, a black swarm closing in, claws and teeth ready to tear them apart. Wordlessly, the friends stood back to back, preparing for a final stand they would never yield. Vyre raised his gore-splattered blade, determined to take down as many Deadclaws as possible before the end. Suddenly a horn blast echoed from the trees. Reinforcements! A platoon of vampire warriors rushed forth, felling Deadclaws with their polearms and crossbows. The tide turned as the beasts fell beneath the onslaught. With savage glee, Vyre helped press forward, driving the Deadclaws back from the village into the dark forest. Only once the last creature had retreated did Vyre finally lower his blade, breathing hard. The remaining girl ran to him, sobbing, grabbing his hands in gratitude. "You saved us," she cried. "I'm so sorry." Vyre shook his head firmly. "It's over now. You're safe." Back at the academy, the girls told Lord Noctum what had happened. He glared furiously. "Your foolishness could have doomed us all." He turned to Vyre and Brom. "But you both showed tremendous courage. The villagers owe their lives to you." Despite the high praise, sadness clung to Vyre's heart. He had been too late to save the first girl. He stared at the floor in sullen silence as Lord Noctum dismissed them. He felt Brom clap a hand on his shoulder. You did everything you could, he said gently. All we can do now is keep fighting. Vyre knew his friend was right. With new resolve, he followed Brom to finally meet with Lord Noctum and propose a true peace between humans and vampires. The ancient lord received them in his candlelit chamber. Vyre's nerves threatened to get the better of him, but he forced out the words. Lord, after recent events, we beg you consider sending envoys to the human kings with an offer of peace. We believe only unity can end this conflict with the dead claws. Vyre sweated anxiously as Lord Noctum sat silent in contemplation. When he finally spoke, his voice was weary, but open. For so long, it seemed folly to think our kinds could ever reconcile. But perhaps you are right. We must at least make the attempt. He stood decisively. I shall send out our fastest envoys at next full moon, carrying letters for the kings of Tradesburg, Falkenstone and all other human lands. If even one responds favorably, it will be a start. Relief swept through Vyre. Here, at last, was real hope for change. The first ray of light in an age of endless darkness. Chapter 4. In the nights that followed, an air of tension fell over the vampire realm. All awaited the full moon and departure of the envoys to the human kings with Lord Noctum's historic peace offer. Vyre threw himself into training, trying not to obsess over the uncertain future. As he dueled Petra in hand-to-hand combat, trading blocks and strikes in the torchlit cavern, his mind kept straying. What if the human rulers rejected Noctum's offer out of deeply ingrained prejudice? War could erupt again between the races. Deadclaws would thrive among the chaos. Distracted, Vyre left himself open. Petra swept his legs out from under him. He hit the stone floor hard, jolted back to the present. You're distracted, friend, Petra said, helping him up. What troubles you? Vyre hesitated. He wasn't supposed to share Lord Noctum's plans yet. Just anxious about our next Deadclaw patrol, he muttered. Petra gave him a searching look, but let the matter drop. After training, Vyre stopped by the castle aviary to see his messenger raven, Shadow. He fed the sleek black bird treats, smiling as it playfully pecked his hand. Dark days ahead, my friend, he murmured. But you will help carry the hope of peace. Shadow nuzzled against his hand, sensing his need for comfort. On the eve of the full moon, Vyre joined his comrades for a solemn feast in the Academy dining hall. Tomorrow night, their swift raven messengers would fly to human lands with scrolls bearing Lord Noctum's signature and seal. Vyre had never seen the ancient master vampire look so grave. My loyal warriors, Noctum began, you all know the crucial mission that begins tomorrow. I tell you now so that you may focus your minds on success. The envoys carry a message of reconciliation and common cause to the human kings. But the way forward will not be easy, even should they accept our words. He looked upon each of their faces. Have faith. With courage, there is always hope. We shall prevail against the dark together. His words sent a murmur through the hall. Vyre saw hope, but also anxiety, on his friends' faces. He knew they all feared the war that could come if peace failed. After the feast ended, Vyre retreated outside to clear his head. He climbed the winding stairs up the mountainside behind the academy, settling on a flat overlook facing the forbidden human lands. The moonlit forests and valleys looked tranquil, giving no hint of the chaos that could soon erupt. Vyre sighed, pulling his cloak tighter against the night's chill. Tomorrow, the die would be cast. He could only pray to the vampire elders of old that the humans' hearts would be swayed. If the kingdoms fell into conflict again, rivers of blood would flow. Vyre thought of the kind, artistic souls Cain has described among humans. The children whose laughter rang through their villages. Did their rulers realize that mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters would die in droves if war came? Vyre had to hope wisdom would prevail over fear. The night of the full moon arrived. At moonrise, the envoys gathered in the aviary, readying their fastest ravens. 2 birds would fly to each kingdom bearing scrolls stamped with Lord Noctum's unmistakable seal. Vyre stepped forth carrying Shadow on his arm. He solemnly affixed a small bag holding the scrolls for Tradesburg around the raven's neck. "Fly swift and true, Shadow," Vyre whispered. "They're our hope of peace." One by one, the envoy ravens took wing through the open dome of the aviary, speeding off toward the human lands. Vyre watched the dark shapes recede into the distance until they were specks swallowed by night. The fate of both races flew with them now. In the anxious days that followed, the Academy's rigorous training became Vyre's only distraction from constant worrying. He volunteered for frequent border patrols just for the chance to occupy his mind battling deathclaws in the forest. If war came, he wanted to be as prepared as possible. 1 week after the envoys had been sent, Vyre stood sentinel on the Academy battlements, gazing toward the human border for any sign of response. Distant wing beats made him look up eagerly. A large raven swooped down to land on his arm, one of their envoy birds. Hands shaking, Vyre removed the small scroll bearing Tradesburg's royal seal from its pouch. He raced to the throne room where Lord Noctum and the others awaited news with bated breath. Vyre handed the scroll to Noctum with a deep bow. The hall fell silent as Noctum broke the seal and unrolled the letter. His eyes scanned the words. Vyre felt his chest tighten painfully. Then Noctum looked up gravely. "The King of Tradesburg is open to discussion." Gasps and murmurs broke out across the hall. Vyre's knees nearly buckled in relief. This was more than he had dared hope for. If even one human ruler was receptive, real dialogue could begin. Noctum raised a hand for silence. "He writes that he will send envoys to our border in 1 week's time. We are to receive them for a diplomatic assembly." Applause erupted in the hall now. Vyre saw his own teary-eyed joy reflected on his friends' faces. Peace suddenly felt within grasp. Surely the other kingdoms would soon see reason as well. But Cain, ever thoughtful, wore a troubled look. He pulled Vyre aside. "I fear overconfidence, my friend," he said softly. "This is but the first timid step. Many obstacles remain." Vyre clasped his shoulder. "You are right to be cautious," he replied. "But for now, we celebrate hope." Cain managed a faint smile in return. The week of waiting that followed was filled with bustling activity to prepare for the diplomatic assembly. Decorators draped the grand chamber with velvet banners in soft earth tones to welcome the human dignitaries. Exotic night-blooming flowers adorned every surface, filling the hall with their heady scent. Tailors fitted the Academy warriors with new grey formal uniforms edged in gold and silver accents. Vyre watched Nightclaw patrols doubled along the border as a security precaution. He knew some opposed this human-vampire meeting and would prefer war. But he trusted in Lord Noctum's guarded optimism. On the appointed night, Vyre stood in full dress uniform beside Brom among the rows of assembled warriors. Curious vampire citizens crammed against the back walls to witness this historic event. At the front of the hall sat Lord Noctum on his carved ebony throne, his flowing ceremonial robes resplendent. A rustle of whispers drew Vyre's gaze to the tall oak doors as they slowly swung open. In marched 24 armored humans in formation, red and gold banners held high. At their lead was a distinguished man in robes and jeweled crown, clearly the King of Tradesburg. His eyes carefully scanned the hall and assembled vampires as his envoys formed up behind him. Noctum stood solemnly and extended a hand in greeting. "King Theobald, you honor us with your presence. Let us speak plainly and seek common ground." Vyre hardly breathed as the stately king knelt before Lord Noctum. This simple act of respect left Vyre dizzy with hope. Perhaps even ancient grudges could heal. The assembly began. Noctum spoke of the deathclaw threat both races faced, and the need to unite against it. King Theobald listened closely, and gradually seemed to accept the logic, though warily. They delicately discussed past conflicts, and the possibility of humans providing blood willingly in exchange for vampire protection. Neither side made concessions easily, but Vyre was filled with admiration for their diplomacy. After hours of intense discussion, at last the king and Lord Noctum clasped forearms in solemn agreement. "A new dawn begins," declared Noctum. "A dawn of cooperation instead of bloodshed. Tonight's accord is but the first step on the path to lasting amity between races. Our fates are intertwined, and together we shall see peace prevail." Emotions overwhelmed Vyre as rapturous cheers filled the hall late into the night. He knew this was a start, not a resolution. But prejudices had been overcome. Bonds had formed. No matter what came next, this moment proved peace was possible. As the first light of dawn crept into the hall, the humans prepared to take their leave. Lord Noctum handed King Theobald a small crystal vial on a golden chain. "A token of our sacred covenant," he said solemnly. "When you face darkness, let this fill you with light. Until we meet again in friendship." The king bowed his head graciously. "Your hospitality honors you, Lord Noctum. Let our kinds walk forward in faith, not fear." Vyre watched the last armored envoy disappear through the great doors with a swirl of red and gold cloaks. He felt Cain clasp his shoulder. "Well done, my friend," Cain said with a smile. "Some battles are won with patience and words, not swords. You helped bring us to this moment." Vyre modestly shook his head. "I merely did what I felt was right, as did we all." After the humans' departure, Vyre joined his comrades in the dawn feast celebrating their achievement. Spirits soared high and mouths watered as servants emerged from the kitchens bearing trays piled high with roasted boar, exotic fruits floating in blood wine, and goblets full of exhilarating human port. Tomorrow night training would resume, but for now, they reveled in newfound hope. Vyre raised his goblet high. "To peace," he cheered with his friends. Lord Noctum met his happy gaze and smiled. Chapter 5. In the nights following the historic assembly, the mood within the vampire kingdom was transformed. Warriors trained with lighter hearts, scholars eagerly exchanged ideas on joint human-vampire projects, and rumors flew about further diplomatic meetings. But one matter still weighed heavily on Vyre's mind: the Deadclaws. Their attacks had only grown more vicious of late. He knew the final battle was coming. Vyre was leading a patrol one moonless night when screams split the silence, coming from a remote village near the human borderlands. Vyre and his patrol sprinted toward the sounds of chaos. They stumbled onto a scene of carnage, Deadclaws slaughtering villagers and setting fires that licked at the night sky. "Help the survivors flee to safety," Vyre yelled to his warriors. "I'll draw the Deadclaws away." Vyre charged right into the heart of the horde, swinging his blade in broad, deadly arcs, felling Deadclaws on all sides. His only thought was pulling them away from the innocent villagers. His rash charge served its purpose: the Deadclaws abandoned the village and swarmed toward him instead. Vyre now had to employ all his skill to somehow survive. He spun and wove between slashing black claws and gnashing teeth. His sword sang as it sheared through sinew and bone. But the tide was against him. For each Deadclaw killed, two more sprang at him. Vyre cried out as a set of claws raked painfully across his back. He stumbled, and they were on him. He disappeared beneath a writhing pile of Deadclaws. This was the end. With a fierce roar, Brom smashed into the fray, hacking at the beasts to rescue his friend. Cain and Petra were close behind. Together the warriors slashed and stabbed until the remaining Deadclaws retreated from the gore-splattered fighters. Vyre struggled to his feet, covered in both his and the Deadclaws' blood. He clasped arms with each of his friends in profound gratitude. Though bruised and cut, Vyre had somehow survived. Back at the academy, Vyre's wounds were tended to as he described the attack on the village. Grave concern was etched on every face. Lord Noctum's brow was deeply lined. "The Deadclaws have never been so aggressive," he rasped. "I fear we have erred in delaying a full assault on their lair. Their numbers must be culled swiftly before more innocent lives are lost." He stood tall and resolute before his warriors. "You have all trained your whole lives for this mission. Tonight we take the battle to them. We attack the foul creatures in their own dark nest. Are you with me? The cavern shook with the cheers of the wild warriors. Vyre's heart swelled with devotion to their leader. He raised his sword high. To battle, shouted Noctem. The army of vampires marched forth into the moonless night. Vyre strode proudly alongside his comrades, prepared to fulfill his destiny. The small human village nearest to the Dead Claw's lair had been evacuated to safer lands. Vyre said a prayer for the poor villagers displaced by their quest. If this night went according to plan, the Dead Claws would be obliterated and humans could return home. But dare Vyre let hope of victory grow too soon? These beasts had proven vicious and resilient. He steeled himself for the bloodbath ahead. Lit torches bobbing above them, the army marched across the rocky crags toward the enemy's cave. Scouts soon reported the first sightings of Dead Claws emerging from their lair. Noctem raised his crossbow and fired the first bolt, spearing a beast through the eye. Attack, he bellowed. With primal fierceness, the vampires unleashed their onslaught. Vyre lost himself in the chaos of battle. Surrounded by death on all sides, his reality narrowed to the next enemy to kill. He felled Dead Claws with lethal precision, one after another, until his sword grew black with ichor. But more monsters kept crawling from deep within the caves. For every one slain, another took its place. The battle quickly turned into a stalemate at the mouth of the massive cave complex. "We're blocked from advancing," Brom yelled to Vyre over the cacophony. Vyre assessed desperately. "We have to find another way in. Outflank them." He gathered a small team and circled the mountainside seeking another cave entrance. At last they discovered a small, steep tunnel winding down into darkness. Vyre did not hesitate. Lighting a torch, he plunged down into the unknown, his friends at his back. They crept through oppressive blackness, the only sounds their own echoing footfalls and the skittering of claws on stone in the distance. Foul air choked their lungs. But they pushed on relentlessly. The twisting passage ended at a sheer drop, the underside of the cavern system where battle still raged far above. Vyre secured his torch and gripped the rope they had carried. Slowly, silently, the team rappelled down the 100-foot rock face. Faint light from above revealed masses of Dead Claws crawling along the cavern floor toward the distant sounds of combat. They seemed oblivious to the danger now in their midst. Vyre dropped the last 10 feet, landing in a silent crouch. He drew his blade and stole toward the nearest beast. With one quick slash, he severed its spine. The Dead Claws nearby whirled in surprise at their fallen comrade. In unison, Vyre and his warriors attacked with the element of surprise. The following minutes were a blur of vicious blades and black blood. They cut through the Dead Claw masses with merciless efficiency from the vulnerable flank. But soon the horde turned their full fury upon the small team. Claws and teeth ripped at them from all sides. Petra cried out as a set of claws gouged across her face. Vyre snarled and thrust his sword through the offending creature's heart. They formed a desperate circle, spinning and striking in flawless unison, but the enemies were relentless. "We can't keep this up forever," Brom yelled hoarsely over the fray. "We need to retreat." Every fiber of Vyre's being resisted fleeing this all-important battle. But his rational mind knew Brom spoke wisdom. "Back for the rope," Vyre shouted. As one, they began fighting their way back toward their secret entrance, slashing and dodging. Adrenaline fueled Vyre as he covered their withdrawal. At last they reached the rope and scrambled up as fast as their tired limbs could manage. Halfway up, deadly claws grasped at Vyre's feet, but he managed to kick free of their hold and clamber to safety. They emerged bone-weary but alive from their risky maneuver. Vyre led the limping team around to rejoin the main army still battling fiercely at the cave mouth. Even from a distance, the carnage was clear. Hundreds lay dead or dying on the rocks. Both sides were decimated, but the tide had finally turned against the Dead Claws. With a burst of renewed vigor, Vyre and his band threw themselves into the fray once more. Side by side with his comrades, Vyre fought like one possessed, carving down the foul beasts who had taken so much from them all. The survivors began to flee deeper into the lair's tunnels, but Vyre did not relent. "We end this tonight," he roared, pursuing them. Noctum's forces charged behind him, chasing the dead claws down every branching path until the beasts had nowhere left to run. Here, in the fetid heart of their domain, the final stand came. Outnumbered and surrounded, the last dead claws fought with desperate fury, tearing and biting viciously even as blades ran them through. But it was futile. By the time Vyre slashed open the pale throat of the last wretched dead claw, his chest heaved with exhaustion. Silence fell over the torchlit caverns. The only sound was the victorious army's ragged breaths. None could yet believe their age-old foe was gone at last. But as the minutes stretched on with no new attacks forthcoming, joyful cheers erupted across the blood-drenched army. Lord Noctum strode among the weary warriors, clapping them proudly on the shoulders. "My loyal friends, this is a victory for the ages," he proclaimed. "Let all honor those lost in this struggle. But rejoice, for the dead claw's reign of terror has ended." The return journey was slow, carrying their wounded and dead, but Vyre's heart felt lighter than it had in years. The pale light of dawn greeted the army delivered home. As Vyre embraced his dearest friends, all bloodied but alive, he was overwhelmed with gratitude. Whatever came next for their kinds, it would be in a world without fear. In the quiet twilight before sleeping through the next day, Vyre climbed his favorite mountain overlook facing the human lands. He remembered recently looking upon those lands and envisioning the havoc that could spread. Now, he let himself imagine those villages and valleys at peace. With the dead claws gone, humans had no cause to hate vampires. Prejudices could continue fading. Perhaps their two worlds could truly unite. Vyre smiled up at the emerging stars as he imagined mankind and vampire kind thriving together under one moon. The future suddenly seemed brighter than he had ever dared hope. Chapter 6. In the nights following the dead claw's defeat, a new energy electrified the vampire kingdom. Warriors celebrated their victory while scholars jumped into planning joint projects with humans. Vyre observed the changing mood with satisfaction, but also curiosity about what this peace would mean. He received an answer one night when Lord Noctum summoned him to a private meeting. "Vyre, you've become a fine warrior," Noctum said. "But now you have a new role to play." He explained that envoys were being sent to visit each human kingdom, to deepen their bonds of cooperation. Vyre would join Cain on this vital mission. Pride swelled in Vyre's chest. "I am honored, my lord. I will forge strong ties between our kinds." Noctum nodded. "You leave in 3 nights. Study our histories and magic to impress the humans." He smiled wryly. "And pack formal attire for their stuffy courts." The next nights were a whirlwind of preparation under Cain's tutelage. He drilled Vyre on diplomacy and quizzed his knowledge of human culture. Tailors fitted them with smart black and silver uniforms. At last, 3 nights later, their small envoy party stood ready at the border. Vyre embraced Brom and Petra tightly. "Stay out of trouble while I'm gone," he told them warmly. "No promises," Petra laughed. With farewell said, the envoys departed into the night. A full moon lit their journey through the dense forest. Vyre's excitement to see this new world warred with nerves. He glanced at Cain riding calmly beside him. "Are you not anxious?" Vyre asked. "You've prepared me well, yet still I worry about misunderstandings." Cain gave an easy smile. "Friend, the key is having an open heart and mind. Prejudice is often born of ignorance, not malice. If we approach in friendship, it shall be returned." His sage words comforted Vyre as their party emerged from the woods into tilled fields, then the cobbled streets of a prosperous town. Passers-by stared in curiosity and whispered at the sight of armor-clad vampires. But none showed open hostility. Feeling hopeful, they rode on toward the castle sprawling atop a distant hill. The armored guards at the castle gates readily welcomed the diplomatic envoys. Stable hands took their horses as they were escorted inside the towering stone keep. Vyre gawked at lavish tapestries and statues adorning the corridors. This was finer than even Lord Noctum's austere abode. At last they entered the vast throne room. Vyre winced at the bright lantern light and drawn curtains amplifying the weak dawn sun. At least the king's sympathetic advisor had agreed to a meeting at first light, sparing them true sun exposure. Squinting ahead, Vyre saw an elderly, silver-haired man seated on the gilded throne, King Wolfgang III of Eventide Valley. The envoys stopped and bowed deeply before his piercing but curious gaze. His wrinkled eyes looked them over shrewdly. "You must be Lord Noctum's emissaries," the king said at last in a thin but strong voice. "Rise. Let us speak." Cain stepped forward graciously. "Your Majesty, thank you for so warmly welcoming us to your fine kingdom. We come on behalf of Lord Noctum seeking friendship between our peoples." Vyre stood nervously as King Wolfgang questioned Cain on their customs, abilities, and intentions. To Vyre's relief, Cain's calm eloquence won over the king's doubts, until he was listening with great interest. Impressed himself, Vyre made notes to emulate Cain's balance of humility and quiet confidence. "You have given me much to consider," the king said at last. "I am open to cooperation, but symbolic gestures of trust must come first." Cain bowed his head diplomatically. "We understand, Your Majesty. We shall report your words to Lord Noctum directly." Their first formal visit concluded on a hopeful note. As they left the castle, Vyre felt optimistic. But he sensed the symbolic acts the king wanted could be a delicate matter. He resolved to tread carefully when conveying his request to Noctum. Over the next month, the envoys visited the courts of 3 other human kingdoms, delivering letters from Noctum and negotiating tentative accords. The ruler of each domain asked for gestures of trust from the vampires first. Vyre carefully compiled their requests to present to Noctum. Upon returning to the vampire kingdom, they were granted an immediate private audience with the ancient lord. Vyre knelt before the stone throne. "My lord, the human rulers show great promise," he reported. "But symbolic acts are needed to break lingering unease. They ask for small gifts of our magic imbued in crystal amulets they might display, to show our friendly intent." Noctum considered, then nodded. "Their request shows wisdom. Magic freely given is no small thing, but an important step." He brought forth a locked box containing various enchanted crystals the scholars had imbued with protective spells. "Let us forge goodwill," Noctum said solemnly, handing several to Vyre and Cain. Their mission continued. This time, when presented with the magic crystals from Noctum, the human kings were deeply moved by the vulnerable show of trust. "Please convey my gratitude to Lord Noctum," said King Theobald of Tradesburg, clutching the amulet. "With this, I shall fear no shadows." At the last castle, an unexpected surprise awaited. When granted an audience with King Rhys of Gildenville, he stood and greeted them with a smile. "Lord Noctum's emissaries. Your timing could not be better." To their astonishment, he guided them to his chamber where waited a pale, red-eyed girl of no more than 10, a vampire child. "You must see that this lost one is returned safely home," said the kindly king. Tears shone in the girl's eyes as Vyre knelt gently before her. "Be at peace, little one," he said. "We shall take you home." The king explained she had appeared in the village weeks ago, frightening the superstitious folk. But he had given her refuge in the castle, trying fruitlessly to locate her origins. Vyre's heart swelled with gratitude. This simple act embodied the goodness Cain had spoken of in humans. At Lord Noctum's court, the girl was tearfully reunited with the distraught parents who had lost her over a year ago. Such selfless care from a human ruler proved his sincerity beyond doubt. Swift couriers carried word throughout the vampire lands, the time of division was over at last. In the following nights, vampires and humans mingled freely across both kingdoms for the first time in centuries. At the border villages, Vyre watched tentative meetings turn to eager curiosity and friendship. He accepted many awestruck children's requests to see his fangs and sword. Laughter rang from fireside gatherings of guards swapping stories. At Kane's urging, Vyre gathered his courage to visit the bustling human city of Tradesburg for himself. Under the moonlight, its spires and glass windows gleamed welcomingly. In the lively taverns, Vyre's uniform drew many curious glances. But the humans invited him eagerly to their tables to share in food, ale and music. Their generosity and humor disarmed Vyre's nerves. For the first time beyond his kingdom's walls, he felt at home. A month after the borders opened, it was time for the most important moment, a grand ball to celebrate the union of kingdoms. Vyre dressed in a flowing robe of burgundy velvet. In the mirrored hall adorned with black and gold finery, he hardly recognized himself. Kane grinned and clapped his back. "You look like a proper diplomat." Vyre elbowed him playfully, heart pounding as they followed Noctum to the doors. They swung open onto a scene of wonder. The hall was filled with vampires and humans mingling happily beneath twinkling lights. Music swelled as Noctum and the human rulers entered together. As one, the crowd turned and kneeled in reverence for these peacemakers. "Rise, friends!" Noctum's voice rang out warmly. "Let all be equal this night." After formal dances opened the ball, humans and vampires began joyfully mingling across the floor in pairs and groups. Vyre found himself swept into a lively dance with a laughing blonde noblewoman, twirling artfully across the floor. He was integrated flawlessly into conversation with jovial human nobles, as though he had always belonged. As midnight neared, Noctum called for silence and raised a glass. "This union honors the best in us all. Though dark days may come, never again shall we stand divided." Amidst thunderous cheers, Vyre's gaze found Petra, Brom and Kane across the hall. Through everything, they had always stood together. Now at this moment of celebration, his smile said more than words could express. Their movement stood on the right side of history. Whatever came next, they would face it united. Chapter 7. In the idyllic months that followed, the bonds between humans and vampires only grew stronger. Under Lord Noctum's leadership, joint building projects bloomed across the borderlands, including a new village where both kinds lived and worked together. Vyre found purpose helping construct an academy to train vampire youth and human volunteers in magic. Yet darkness crept at the edges of this new society. Rumors reached Vyre's ears of vampire radicals who spurned cooperation with humans. He prayed inclusion and prosperity would smother their dissent. But one night, his illusions were shattered. Vyre was supervising work on the academy when Kane burst in wielding a blood-stained sword, face etched with grief. "Bandits ambushed a joint supply convoy," he rasped. "They wore our kingdom's colors, it was our own kind." Rage and shame clashed within Vyre as he grasped the implications. This had been no random crime, but a calculated blow against unity delivered by his own people. What could drive them to such evil? "We ride on the convoy's trail at moonrise," Vyre said, jaw clenched. "These betrayers must face vampire justice." Under the rising moon, they tracked the bandits' trail to a derelict keep in the mountains. Vyre counted 24 horses tethered outside, displaying the vampire kingdom's crest. His stomach turned. How deep did this treachery root within their ranks? Crouched in the brush, Vyre outlined a plan. "We attempt diplomacy first. But be prepared to disarm by force." They approached slowly, hands raised. A crossbow bolt whistling past Kane's head was their only answer. In a blur they drew swords and charged, crashing through the barricaded door. The filthy main hall swarmed with radical vampires, who spat curses about beastly humans and polluted blood. Diplomacy was useless here. With ruthless speed honed from centuries of combat drills, Vyre and his warriors swiftly disarmed and restrained every rebel. But their leader, a hulking vampire named Rathman, still thrashed violently in Kane's grip, frothing outrage. Vyre's cold gaze bore into the traitor's bared fangs. You betray our kingdom and future with these attacks, he said. Explain yourself before the elders. They chained the prisoners and marched them back toward the borderlands. But Vyre knew the radicals' poisonous hatred ran deeper than these few. This shift toward darkness was a dangerous omen. What virulent seed had they watered? Lord Noctum's stoic expression was grim as he passed judgment on the rebels. Your actions violate our covenant of peace, he intoned severely. You leave me no choice but to strip your titles and privileges. Forevermore, you are exiles from both vampire and human lands. It was a lenient sentence, but Vyre knew Noctum disliked harshness despite the gravity of their crime. He only prayed it would not embolden future attacks. His worries were confirmed barely a week later, when screams pierced the night at their border village. Arriving at the gory scene, Vyre felt his stomach drop. Half the residents lay lifeless, torn apart by savage beasts. Giant wolf prints marred the blood-soaked dirt. Werewolves, Cain murmured beside him. The radicals must have released them as a weapon. Rage boiled Vyre's blood, but now was the time for clear heads. We track the pack at dawn, he declared. Before the curse of the full moon falls again. At first light, they followed the bloody trail to a network of caves in the mountains. Drawn swords glinted in the darkness as they crept through dank tunnels littered with gnawed bones. The hisses and howls reverberating through the caverns left no doubt they stalked the lair of the deadly pack. They lurched into a massive central cavern and were met by glinting eyes and bared fangs from all sides. The enormous alpha werewolf snarled at the head of his pack, poised to pounce. We come in peace, friend, Cain said evenly. We seek those who imprisoned you here. Lys, the alpha snarled. You are allies of Thos blood drinkers. The pack attacked as one. Vyre tore his gaze from their attackers' human eyes. These were innocent victims of a curse. He dodged gnashing teeth and threw himself into the fray, wielding his blade with non-lethal precision. After an intense clash of fangs and steel, the pack was pacified without fatalities. Panting, Vyre faced the alpha, who regarded him warily. We share a foe, friend, Vyre said. Guide us to the vampires who cursed you, and you shall have justice. The werewolf bared his teeth, but nodded. The pale onus came from the west, we will track their scent. They forged a cautious alliance with the pack, following the trail into the forests west of the caves. Howls led them to a crumbling tower deep in the woods. Vyre tensed as inhuman shrieks echoed from within those accursed walls. What fresh evil festered here? Vyre, Cain and the alpha crept inside, tracing the shrieks to a shadowy chamber. They froze at the sight within. A dozen vampire radicals stood chanting around a bloody ritual altar, while chained to the floor writhed rotted, undead corpses, some human, some vampire. Vyre clenched his fist, revolted by this perversion of life and death. Abominations! Cain roared. Your madness ends tonight. A fierce clash exploded within those cursed walls. Vyre weaved and slashed in a lethal dance, severing limbs and rending undead flesh, slowly driving the manic vampires back. With a savage bite to the throat, the alpha werewolf ended the ritual leader, Rathmon. Silence fell over the gore-strewn chamber. Vyre surveyed their carnage grimly. It is done, he said. We must burn this evil. They ransacked the tower and gathered the gruesome remains into a pyre. As the flames consumed that hive of darkness, Vyre turned to his unlikely ally friend. We have saved innocence and delivered justice this night. You now have my trust. The alpha met his eyes, then slowly bowed his great shaggy head. You show honor. Friend. Our pack shall withdraw in peace. Vyre watched the retreating werewolf pack, hoping sincerely they would find sanctuary. He feared this uprising was but the first spark of a growing wildfire. Trouble brewed in both societies. But they had to cling to hope of peace and unity, even if threats darkened the horizon. Vyre could only pray their shared good faith would endure. Chapter 8. In the uneasy nights following the radical vampires' uprising, tensions simmered just below the surface in the united human and vampire communities. Small fights broke out over petty misunderstandings, each side eyeing the other warily again. Vyre knew time was running short to stabilize relations before it all collapsed. He met in hushed urgency with Noctum and his inner circle. Some still cling to old hatreds, Vyre pressed. We must show our resolve before this decay spreads. Noctum considered gravely, then nodded. You speak wisdom. We shall hold a great gathering of both races, a show of solidarity against these provocateurs. Messengers rode out across the kingdom, declaring a festival 3 nights hence to reaffirm their unity. Nervous but hopeful, Vyre donned his ceremonial robes and dagger for the journey to Tradesburg, where thousands gathered in the city square under twinkling lanterns. A hush fell as Lord Noctum took the stage, flanked by both human rulers and his vampire council. My friends, Noctum's voice rang out powerfully. Darkness looms, but shall not prevail. This celebration signifies our unbreakable bonds. Joyous cheers resounded as Noctum lit the customary torch. Vyre's heart swelled. If any traces of division remained, this sight, elders of both races united in friendship, would surely extinguish them. But his joy turned to horror as a flaming arrow whistled from a shadowy rooftop toward the elders. Without thought, Vyre hurtled onto the stage, tackling Noctum clear of the arrow's path. It instead struck the human king of Falkenstone, who cried out before his guards swarmed him. Chaos erupted. The crowd dissolved into panic as more arrows rained down. Vyre scanned the chaos desperately and saw figures with crossbows darting across the rooftops, vampire assassins. Rage flooded his veins. Protect the elders, he roared to the other envoys. He raced after the attackers, swarming up the side of a building in pursuit. His dagger flew from his hand, striking one assassin down before he reached the roof's edge. Vyre tore across the rooftops under the bleak moon, focused only on stopping these traitors. He hurled himself into the path of an assassin taking aim at the stage, knocking them both off the roof to crash hard on the cobbled street. Grimacing in pain, Vyre pinned down the thrashing vampire beneath him. Why? He demanded. This achieved nothing. The assassin spat at him. Humans will never accept us Nightwalkers. Lord Rathmon promised your head for this disgrace. Rathmon, the radical leader. He had survived after all, and Vyre had failed to quell the growing unrest. Despair washed over him. The other envoys soon arrived with news: the human king was injured but alive, protected by his amulet from Noctum. Vyre released a breath of profound relief. This scheme had failed, but next time innocence might pay the price. Back in Noctum's hall, Vyre knelt before his master, shamefaced. Forgive me, my lord. My oversight allowed this. But Noctum raised him up kindly. You showed tremendous courage this night. We must not falter now. I shall send patrols to find and stop Rathmon, once and for all. Over the following nights, tensions escalated rapidly. Vampire dissidents staged more violent strikes across the borderlands. Humans attacked random vampire travelers in reprisal. Vyre's attempts at diplomacy disintegrated into resentment and threats from both sides. Each night more innocents died. At last came dreadful news: patrols had finally tracked down Rathmon's lair, but the mastermind was gone. Somehow he had raised a massive force of radical vampires, and now marched openly on Tradesburg. Vyre stared hollowly at the map where figures representing their meager defenses seemed pitiful against the coming horde. They had failed to contain this. War was upon them. We ride out tonight with all our forces, Noctum rasped grimly. This ends now. Arrayed in their armor, weapons glinting grimly in the moonlight, Vyre and his comrades thundered toward embattled Tradesburg. Chaos met them at the gates. Blood slicked the streets where rebels rampaged. Black smoke choked the skies from fires across the city. Patrols desperately evacuated civilians toward the castle. High on the ramparts flew Rathmon's blood-red banner. With hearts steeled for battle, Noctum's forces charged into the ravaged city to clash with the sea of radical vampires. And so their own people came to murderous blows. Vyre was plunged into a nightmare of spinning blades, spraying blood, and screams. He felled opponent after opponent, their snarling faces blurring together as his only goal became survival. A crossbow bolt glanced off his pauldron in a flare of sparks. He cleaved that assassin in two without blinking. "Get the civilians to safety," Vyre distantly heard Noctum order. "I will find Rathmon." Slowly their forces drove the chaos toward the central square before the castle. Their Noctum suddenly stumbled as an arc of violet energy lanced from the highest tower Rathmon's magic. Vyre watched in horror as his mentor fell. "No," he cried hoarsely, throat raw from smoke and screams. Beside him Brom roared and carved through the enemies separating them from the castle gate. Together they battled their way inside, through groups of rebels, up the spiraling steps stained with blood. They would not lose their master this night. At the top they burst into a spacious chamber. Noctum lay crumpled on the floor, pale and unmoving. Looming above him stood Rathmon, his fanged grin cold and vicious. "How the mighty Noctum has fallen," he taunted. "You are too late. His light will never fade." Vyre bellowed in rage. He and Brom attacked as one from both sides. Magic lashed at them as Rathmon drew a curved dagger. Sparks flew as their blades clashed again and again, 2 against 1, driving the traitor back across the chamber. Vyre felt only icy resolve. No more chaos and death would spread at this one's hands. In a moment's distraction, Brom left an opening. Rathmon's blade flashed, and Brom gasped as it sunk into his chest. "No!" Vyre howled, catching his friend as he fell. Grief and fury melded into pure devastation as Vyre turned on Rathmon. His onslaught came with blinding speed, decades of training distilled into every lethal strike. The traitor soon lay in pieces on the bloody floor. But Vyre's cry of victory became a sob as he clutched Brom's limp body. His oldest friend was gone. The battle won, Vyre carried Brom's body and the unconscious Noctum with reverent care back through the ruined city. By dawn the living were tended to and the dead mourned. But Vyre took no comfort in their victory. He gazed out at the smoldering city and endless rows of shrouded bodies with deadened eyes. Everything they had built now lay in ashes because he had not acted decisively enough. Cain stepped solemnly to his side. "Your swift actions tonight saved thousands, my friend," he said gently. "This burden is not yours alone to bear." But Vyre knew his own doubt had fertilized the seeds of chaos. If their dream of unity would persist, he could not falter again. From now on, he would meet every challenge with unflinching strength. Wiping his eyes, Vyre turned away from the painful sights. Dawn's light still glowed with promise if they willed it. He clasped Cain's shoulder. "Come. There are wounds to bind and hearts to mend." And so from the smoldering ruins, Vyre once more began the slow work of restoring hope. Chapter 9. In the devastating aftermath of the attack, rebuilding the ravaged city became Vyre and Cain's all-consuming mission. They toiled night after night clearing rubble, refortifying walls, and tending the injured. Food and medicine remained in dangerously short supply. Anger simmered on both sides of the racial divide. One dusk as they hauled stones to repair a breached wall, a mob of human youths marched up waving torches. "Blood drinkers aren't wanted here," their leader shouted. "This is your fault." Vyre stood calmly before them. "Friend, I know hearts are heavy," he said. "But we must stand together now against darkness." The man spat. "Pretty words won't bring back the dead. We want justice." The mob surged forward, but Cain's voice rang out. "Brothers! Stay your hands!" He gestured to the vampire workers behind them. "These are friends, family. They mourn the fallen also." The men gradually lowered their weapons, shame dawning on their faces as they saw the vampires flinch back in fear. Vyre clasped the leader's shoulder. "Your pain is understood. Healing takes time, but we must begin with empathy. There were no more violent outbursts after that night. But rebuilding goodwill would require a grand symbolic gesture. Vyre conceived an idea one weary dawn after hauling stones, a memorial cairn honoring the fallen of both races. At its unveiling, human and vampire elders laid the first stones together, hugging tightly afterward. Seeing tears flow down both their faces, the crowds lowered their heads in reverent silence. Old divisions melted away. With Tradesburg stabilized, Vyre turned his attention to the network of dissidents still scattered across the land. He handpicked squads to track down cells of rebels and either capture or drive them into exile. It was grim work, but gradually the pockets of chaos dwindled. Yet two crucial matters remained. The assassin's arrow had gravely wounded King Theobald, leaving him comatose and airless. And Vyre still had not tracked down the source of the dissidents' dark magic that felled Lord Noctum. But he pursued every whisper tirelessly, knowing the future remained imperiled without answers. The night's first clues came from a raided rebel hideout. Etched upon the walls was an unsettling symbol, a black iris within a spiked wreath. Beneath lay charred remains of blood sacrifices. Vyre knew this insignia must connect to the dissidents' occult power source. But how? He shared the symbol with a receptive young scholar named Elias who had shown interest in their struggle. "I shall scour every archive for its meaning," Elias vowed. His research soon bore fruit. The iris wreath belonged to a cabal of blood mags based in the Deadwoods, vampires practicing evil magic forbidden centuries ago. They had nearly been purged after the war, but survivors must have rebuilt in secret, likely allying with the dissidents. Vyre immediately rode for the Deadwoods to root out this hidden bastion. He brought only Elias and Cain to avoid alerting the blood mags. The mist-shrouded woods lived up to their ominous name. Every surface glinted with dark ooze, the trees gnawed into screaming faces. At each sound, the horses started and whinnied nervously. "Over there," Elias whispered, seeing a faint glow through the trees. Dismounting, they crept forward and found a clearing where crimson-robed figures chanted around a bubbling font of blood. "By the elders, such depravity," Cain muttered. Vyre narrowed his eyes. The blood font's magic could sustain this cult no longer. On his signal they charged, blades drawn. The mags' twisted blood magic lashed at them from all sides. Vyre raised his sword to deflect pulsating orbs of liquid. Chanting an incantation, Elias somehow absorbed their spells into his own staff. Together they battled toward the font to destroy it. But spectral hands grasped at them from the blood, trying to drag them into the boiling pool's dark depths. Roaring his fury, Vyre fought through the grasping phantoms and shattered the cursed font with 3 powerful blows. Its otherworldly glow died. Without its power, the few surviving mags quickly fell to their blades. Panting with exhaustion, Vyre stared grimly at the carnage surrounding the cracked basin. This evil had nearly consumed the land from the shadows. He only prayed they had destroyed it soon enough. They burned every trace of the blood mag's presence before departing that accursed place. With their occult magic quenched, Vyre knew the dissidents would become isolated threats easily hunted down. Returning triumphant, Vyre expected celebration, but found the palace in somber mourning. Over the king's deathbed, the high priest proclaimed that without an heir, chaos threatened the kingdom. But Lord Noctum, though still frail, raised a thin hand to interject. "Friends, let us break old chains," he declared. "The time has come for our kinds to truly unite." He gestured to Vyre. "This loyal guardian embodies the best of vampire and human. Who here will accept him as kin?" After a stunned silence, every hand in the hall raised in agreement. Despite Vyre's protests, Noctum gently crowned him king with Theobald's silver circlet. Looking upon the tearful faces of human and vampire alike, Vyre found his words. "I accept this duty with a full heart," he pronounced. "We shall walk forward into light together." Cheers resounded as humans and vampires embraced. At long last, Vyre saw true unity blossoming from tragedy. The future he had once only dreamed of now lay ahead. There would be much to rebuild, wounds to mend. But side by side, one people could achieve anything. Raising his goblet, King Vyre smiled with sharp fangs and clear eyes. To peace, always. Chapter 10. Though still adjusting to his unexpected coronation, King Vyre threw himself wholeheartedly into his new duties. He had councils to organize, alliances to solidify, and wounds between races to heal. But he knew this historic unification was still fragile. One matter took urgent precedence: finding a solution to the growing famine. The vampire's main blood sources, domestic animals from human farms, had been depleted by war and unrest. Many formerly stable villages in the realm now teetered on the brink as livestock dwindled. Vyre gathered scholars and farmers to brainstorm solutions. The assembly ranged from rationing meager reserves to obtaining blood from beyond their borders. But the king saw the unease on the faces of human delegates during this discussion. An idea struck him. "Friends, let us think outside tradition," Vyre proposed. "Might alchemy craft an artificial alternative to satisfy our scarcity, together?" The gathered experts hummed with intrigue at the challenge. Thus began a joint effort between human chemists and vampire mags to artificially recreate those vital nutrients and proteins found in blood. Endless experiments followed, from brews of rust and molasses to enchanted dusts of dried beetles. The failures often left Vyre coughing or reeling from effects like giddiness and hiccups. But he remained upbeat. After a month, they finalized a thick red liquid with a surprisingly rich, tangy flavor. "Behold, sanguinem," the alchemists announced proudly. Vyre sampled a vial and his fangs tingled pleasantly. This was no mere substitute, but an innovation. He swiftly arranged production and distribution of the blood alternative across vampire territory. Color returned to pallid faces and cries of delight met couriers delivering the goods. This united achievement kindled new energy and camaraderie. Yet troubling incidents continued plaguing remote border villages. Cattle mauled savagely overnight. Vulnerable people vanishing from their homes. Whispers spoke of demons and vengeful spirits. During a tour of the southern villages, an elder took Vyre's hand pleadingly. "Our faith weakens, sire. Our holy wards fail against these dark forces. We need our priest to return. Only his rituals can restore our protections." But their high priest had perished in the Tradesburg siege. Vyre considered thoughtfully, then smiled with realization. What better opportunity to further unify their peoples? He summoned the human priest Father Gregory, renowned for exorcisms and protective rites. The wizened man knelt reverently before Vyre. "Your Highness, I am honored to serve." And so Father Gregory toured each afflicted village, gently coaxing humans and vampires alike to assist in his cleansing rituals. Chanting and wreathing homes in pungent herb smokes, he conducted the rites with a serenity that eased troubled minds. To Vyre's delight, he welcomed vampire acolytes to study his practices. Where once both races called only their own gods for salvation, now they saw holiness could transcend old divisions. The ghastly attacks dwindled after Father Gregory's efforts. But a pall still hung over the kingdom. None had forgotten the blood spilt between their kinds, the hatreds that lingered just beneath the unified surface. If lasting trust was to take root, the king decided bold action must be taken. And so Vyre arranged a summit with the fractious vampire noble houses, calling on them to surrender all relics of the war: weapons, armor, banners. He brought the Novarian wolves, once the mounts of their fiercest warriors, now reduced to beasts of burden. "We must transform the tools of division into ones of creation," Vyre proclaimed before the bristling nobles. He cast his own ruby dagger into a flaming brazier. One by one, they reluctantly followed until the fire roared high. The melted metal was then taken to skilled blacksmiths and cast into a monument depicting human and vampire hands clasped in unity. Hushed crowds gathered at the unveiling in Tradesburg Square. Seeing the once warlike silver folded into this symbol of hope brought tears to ancient, hardened eyes. Or swept the kingdom at their ruler's bold stroke. Healing could come, if hatred was abandoned. That night, a figure approached Vyre's study bearing an ornate chest. Cain set it gently before the king. "We found Rathman's archive," he said. "This contains artifacts used by the blood mags. Its dangerous magic should be sealed away." But Vyre shook his head. "Darkness dies in sunlight," he replied. Cain looked puzzled as Vyre took the chest and walked outside. Before the masses in the square, he unlatched the chest and cast every accursed item into the monument's cleansing fire. The people watched peacefully as the last shadows of evil were purged in cleansing flame and billowing smoke. There was light yet to build between their kinds, wounds left to salve. But Vyre retired at dawn with hope in his heart, knowing fear and hate could be turned to illumination and amity, if met with wisdom. In this he had fierce faith. Chapter 11. In the moons since uniting the kingdoms, Vyre's bonds with the human nobles had grown. But to truly extinguish old prejudices, he knew even deeper connections must be forged. And so the king extended an offer of kinship to the human rulers. If they would accept vampire blood in a solemn ceremony, their life forces would be bound as one family. Most welcomed the offer eagerly, but Lord Garrick Blackstone scoffed. "Lay with leeches? I'd rather perish," he pronounced haughtily. Vyre approached the obstinate noble. "My friend, we cannot force this upon you. But I pray in time your heart softens, for all our sakes." Garrick turned his nose up and stalked off. Vyre sighed, but remained patient. He had weathered worse hatreds than this pompous lord's. In a moonlit ritual beneath the full moon, surrounded by adoring masses, the human nobles came forward one by one to accept a red chalice from Vyre's hand. "Through this bond, we become of one blood," Vyre pronounced as each drank deeply. Thunderous cheers celebrated each new kinship. United in body, the peoples were also joined in trade and protection. Vyre ensured distribution of resources and defense to each region whether human or vampire ruled. Some stubborn vampire nobles grumbled about coddling fragile humans. But Vyre's policies held strong. None in the realm would endure need or fear again. But deep in the darkest northern woods, one not all welcomed this new equity. Something ancient and corrupt festered in the gnarled roots and fungal blooms. Where light entered rotting log and overgrown crag, eyes peered out in hatred. In the dilapidated ruins of a castle consumed by thorny brambles, it gathered power and laid plagues upon the land. Crops withered overnight. Well water curdled into reeking black slime. The people's faith in their new king weakened. During a tour of his realm, Vyre was beset by once prosperous villagers now gaunt and despairing. Their accusing eyes followed the king's passage, the protectiveness he had promised proven a lie. "Please, we need but a small ration of grain," begged a mother cradling a skeletal babe. But the royal granaries were already drained. Vyre could only embrace her and vow to uncover the cause of this creeping blight. Returning to Tradesburg, Vyre knew this was no normal drought. The land itself was deeply sick. He pored desperately over arcane texts seeking an explanation or cure, but found only dead ends. Panic simmered as people fled the spreading bogs. Finally, Elias the scholar burst into Vyre's study, eyes alight. "Your Majesty! I found it!" He lay a crumbling scroll before Vyre, pointing to an ancient map. "Here is the source." Vyre's eyes widened as he traced the map's markings into the cursed northern forest. If his translations were right, something evil indeed festered at this location, once the stronghold of a blasphemous vampire sect that seduced and sacrificed humans to dark gods. Vyre shuddered at the thought of their vile relics buried and abandoned, but not destroyed. "Ready the warriors," Vyre ordered grimly. "We ride at dusk." As the sun set blood-red on the diseased horizon, Vyre and his most elite warriors thundered north through stagnant marsh and woods blurred with spores. At the warped remains of a drawbridge over a sludge-choked moat, Vyre raised a hand and their company halted. Before them loomed the decrepit castle, foulness emanating from its crumbling towers. Whatever evil inhabited this place, they would scour it out tonight. With weapons drawn, they crept over the creaking drawbridge into a courtyard overgrown with malevolent brambles. Clutching an enchanted torch to hold the darkness at bay, Vyre led them toward ornate doors hanging crooked from rusted hinges. The entryway yawned into profound blackness. As one, the king and his warriors plunged into the void with blades glinting in torchlight. They crept through dust-choked halls with grotesque faces leering from rotting tapestries. But no enemy revealed itself until they reached a grand but decayed vestibule. There, on a broken dais encircled by spikes, hunched a shadowy humanoid figure. "The traitor king comes to my abode," it rasped in cruel mirth. "I come to redeem your sins," pronounced Vyre. At his command, the warriors fanned out surrounding the crouched foe. But as Vyre raised his torch, its light revealed not a vampire but a hideous grey beast with antlers and claws clutching an ebon blade. "I am Morgoth, defiler of realms," it howled. "And you are not welcome in my domain." The fangs and blade-like claws of the vampires clashed violently with the unholy strength of the horned demon Morgoth. It rent armor and flesh effortlessly with sweeps of its corroded greatsword. Smashing through their ranks, it made for Vyre with hateful eyes gleaming. Steeling himself, Vyre slashed and spun away from the demon's relentless assault. Only his vampiric speed kept lethal claws at bay, but he could not keep this up forever. As they fought bitterly across the decrepit hall, Vyre knew he must end this soon or perish. Spotting a gap in the beast's defense, Vyre dropped suddenly to the ground as the obsidian blade swept overhead. From his crouch he lunged upwards, burying his sword to the hilt in Morgoth's exposed belly. The demon screeched as ichor spilled from the fatal wound. It toppled with a crash, writhing in death throes. At last the corrupted thing lay still in a spreading pool of black blood. Silence fell over the mildewed hall now cleansed of evil. Vyre roared his victory to the heavens, and his warriors took up the cry. With Morgoth slain, Vyre gave the order to raise the cursed castle to its foundations. They tore down the foul iconography and toppled the spike towers, letting pure winds clear away the miasma. In the nights that followed, health returned swiftly to the land and its people. Crops flourished, water ran clean and spirits soared. The dark days became tales told with hope on grandfathers' knees. Vyre and his brave warriors would be celebrated for generations. There were yet always new trails to blaze and wounds to mend between peoples. But together now, from lowly peasant to king, human and vampire thrived in equity under the sun and moon. None would cede to the shadows again. Chapter 12. With the demon vanquished and the land healed, a new era of prosperity dawned. Vyre commissioned grand cathedrals and markets across the unified kingdom, gathering spaces where both human and vampire could freely mingle. Spurred by peace, the arts flourished, theaters thrived, painters created stunning frescoes, and bards wove ballads that made Vyre weep with their beauty. But struggle was not entirely over. Though reduced to scattered bands, some radical dissidents still stalked the remote wilds. And human-vampire bonding through blood did not guarantee total acceptance. Many vampires still refused to dine alongside humans at feasts, while some superstitious folk would not enter their vampire neighbors' homes. Prejudice faded slowly. Vyre knew time alone would not suffice. He must take the final step to fully join their kind's marriage. Though controversial, Vyre planned to propose at the next gathering of nobles to Lady Meriel, a gentle human known for mending community rifts. Their union would signal a bold new era. The radiant Meriel accepted bashfully, to Vyre's delight. Vampire conservatives grumbled, but most welcomed the news, inundating the royal couple with wedding gifts. Only the ever-obstinate Lord Garrick Blackstone roared his disapproval. "To sully our pure family with tainted blood is an outrage," he fumed. "I shall never accept your abhorrent union or offspring." Vyre approached the seething man calmly. "My friend, we cannot force your beliefs," he said. "But this alliance shall strengthen both our peoples beyond measure." Garrick looked set to bellow furiously once more, but paused at soft pleading from his daughter, Eliza. "Please, father, open your heart. Do not let hatred guide you." Garrick's face softened as she took his hands. Vyre smiled. The younger generation gave him hope. The royal wedding was set for the following spring beneath Tradesburg's flowering apple orchards. Tailors across the kingdom meticulously crafted the bride and groom's attire. On the joyous day, vampires and humans alike gathered eagerly for the historic ceremony. Vyre's breath caught at the vision of his radiant bride gliding toward him, until she took his hands beneath the blossom-laden boughs. As they spoke their vows and shared in sacramental blood, the crowds cheered rapturously. United in matrimony, the king and queen turned to greet their subjects with linked arms. Vyre saw even stubborn lords dabbing their eyes. At the feast afterwards, humans and vampires danced freely together, joyful and unhindered. This marriage represented a new era of amity between them. Inevitably, challenges continued plaguing the outskirts of their territory as radicals robbed border villages and ambushed patrols. But Vyre had anticipated such desperation. The blood bonding allowed him to sense the general mood across all the kingdom's people. He waited patiently as tensions built, ready to intervene. The moment came after marauders brazenly attacked an alchemy caravan, slaughtering human guards and making off with clinking vials of sanguinum. As soon as the survivors brought word, Vyre summoned his affinity-bonded lords and generals. "Riders are tracking the bandits to their refuge as we speak," Vyre told them. "We shall swoop down on these vermin before another sun sets." United in purpose, a powerful force of knights and warriors rode forth on the trail indicated by Vyre's mystically bonded scouts. Through wild forests and up treacherous peaks they galloped, never tiring, driven by shared outrage. As the icy mountain lair came into view, Vyre raised a fist and the company halted. Hundreds of dissidents milled outside the ragged cave entrances. But they were trapped against the sheer mountainside with nowhere to flee. Vyre's army. The king strode forth and issued his ultimatum. "Surrender now and face fair justice, or we shall unleash devastation." In response, a ragged cheer rose up from the cornered vampires. Roaring their hatred, they raised weapons and charged the king's forces. Vyre sighed grimly, then drew his sword. "Obliterate them all," he pronounced. No more would such chaotic evil fester within his lands. The king's army smashed against the ferocious radicals like a hammer blow. But supported by their bonded might, the righteous force overcame the frenzied rebels until they broke and retreated up the sheer mountainside. Now the renegades' rebellion came to a bloody end. None escaped the king and his warriors that day. The gory task complete, Vyre received salutes from his generals and lords. Justice had been delivered swiftly thanks to their mystic unity. Vyre knew word of their retribution would spread far and wide. None would dare disrupt their hard-won peace again. From now on, the kingdoms would know only harmony between all souls under the sun, moon, and stars. Upon returning triumphant, the crowds greeted Vyre and his brave warriors with glorious cheers and cascades of flower petals. Though stern justice had been necessary, Vyre was relieved to complete this dark chapter. He yearned now only for bright days with his people and the gentle queen who awaited him within their palace full of hope and light. Arm in arm they would build a future where no child of human or vampire kind would ever know hate or fear's cruel sting. Let the bards sing of war's bloody victories. Vyre's legacy would be an era of growth, joy, and kinship beyond any fabled epoch past. The king smiled wearily as royal attendants rushed to draw him an aromatic bath. Yes, the future shone bright indeed, and he would gladly spend this life seeing it come to radiant fruition. Chapter 13. In the harmonious era following Vyre's victory, daily life across the United Kingdom came to resemble a dream. Vampires freely roamed sunlit markets buying breads and cakes while human children danced under moonlight with fairy lanterns. After so much strife, this tranquility flourished under the beloved king and queen's guidance. Yet while Vyre rejoiced to see their peoples united in fellowship, after years of marriage he and Meriel remained without an heir. Concerned murmurs questioned whether a human-vampire hybrid was even possible. Though he stayed strong in public, Vyre secretly feared his line would end, undoing all they had built. Meriel sensed his worries and cupped his face lovingly. "Have faith, my heart," she whispered. What is meant to be shall come in time. Her calm wisdom made Vyre smile. No matter what, they had each other. To distract anxious minds, Vyre announced a grand tourney and jubilee. For 3 joyous days, humans and vampires crowded Tradesburg's banners-bedecked streets to feast, dance and cheer tournaments of skill and strength. Laughter rang from candy stalls and taverns alike as old friends embraced. Vyre beamed watching children of both races play together without any trace of fear or mistrust. How far they had all come. The final event was a contest of champions where warriors battled in hand-to-hand combat. Vyre sat with nobles of each realm as grizzled veterans stepped forth for friendly sparring. To thunderous cheers, Lady Caitlin, a fierce human knight, triumphed, lifting her arms in victory. Grinning, Vyre descended to bestow the golden laurel wreath upon her. Their joy shattered in an instant. A crossbow bolt whistled from some shadowy rooftop to pierce Caitlin's neck, dropping her lifeless before the stunned king. Chaos erupted as more assassins emerged from their concealment, firing arrows into fleeing crowds. Protect the queen! Vyre bellowed to his guards, drawing his sword as panic erupted. He saw the assassins' tainted bloodshot eyes, dissidents back from the brink of extinction. Vyre sprinted after the nearest one, escaping across the rooftops. With vicious precision he struck the killer down, then spun to scan for further threats. Seeing Meriel unharmed calmed Vyre's terror. But smoldering anger replaced it. He quickly convened emergency meetings with security forces to root out any remaining dissidents in hiding. They knew better than to show mercy this time. Over the following weeks Vyre scarcely slept, personally assisting raids on every possible rebel hideout they uncovered. He would not be caught off guard again. The public, equally outraged, willingly aided investigations and arrests. Soon the cells overflowed with sullen prisoners. Finally Vyre's agents declared the last assassins to be dead or imprisoned. But troubling questions lingered: who was behind renewing this violent movement Vyre had thought long dead? Was a new threat lurking they had yet to uncover? Pacing his study, Vyre mulled over the fragmentary clues. Each breakout had strangely occurred just before guards arrived, almost as if. Betrayal, he growled, sweeping books off his desk in realization. They had a traitor in their midst. He stormed to summon Meriel and his closest advisors. All listened gravely as Vyre revealed his theory. One of our own has deceived us, he declared. They have played the loyal subject while twistedly restoring our enemies. Murmurs broke out as they parsed every detail for clues, but reached no revelation. Finally Elias spoke. Sire, we must set a trap to expose this false ally. Nodding, Vyre outlined his plan, letting word of a weapons transport leak, ambushing whoever tried to seize it. The court tensely awaited any reaction to the bait over subsequent nights. Then under moonlight they followed Vyre's bonded senses to an estate on the city's fringe. No other dwellings stood nearby, eerily isolated. If my heart does not deceive me, our traitor lurks within, Vyre pronounced. On his command they stormed the grounds, battering down the locked oaken doors to flood inside, lit only by Vyre's torch. Weapons ready, they crept through dusty halls toward muffled voices within the cellar. Vyre's torch illuminated crates of stolen munitions and robed figures gathered around a strange shimmering portal. Halt, villains, shouted Vyre, sword gleaming in the torchlight. But the figures turned with slow menace, revealing not vampire faces but horrible decayed skulls wreathed in shrouds. Your power wanes, usurper king, the wraiths shrieked in unison before gliding back and disappearing into the bizarre portal. It fluctuated wildly, disgorging more spectral horrors that besieged Vyre's shocked forces. Weaving between the ghosts' chilling claws, Vyre barely managed to sever their leader's skull from its spine. The others dissipated into smoke as it fell. Necromancers, Elias said in horror. But that ritual site, it risks tearing open the veil. Vyre rushed to the portal as it flared erratically, leaking spectral energy. Barricade this chamber, he ordered. That rift must be shut. Frantic hours passed as they reinforced the doors and sealed every crevice to contain the unstable portal's leakage. But the haunting aura remained, whispering madness in those who lingered too near. This house would have to remain forever quarantined, its nightmarish contents sealed away. Back at the palace, Mariel rushed anxiously to Vyre's side. "You live, thank heavens." She noticed the lingering unease in his eyes. What evil was done there? Vyre shook his head grimly. "Forces too dark to speak of here, my queen. But once again shadows encroach upon our world. We must stand vigilant." He knew now that resentful remnants forever conspired against their union in whatever foul ways they could devise. Light would always have to defend against insurgent darkness. But defend it they would, so long as hope persevered in their loyal hearts. Come what horrors may, Vyre silently vowed to stand firm. Chapter 14. In the unsettled moons following the necromancer incident, a pall of anxiety hung over the kingdom. Trust had been shaken once more by betrayal from within. But Vyre knew despair was precisely the enemy's design. He redoubled efforts strengthening the people's spirit. "Darkness shall only prevail if we cower from the light," he pronounced in speeches across the land. "We must stand radiant and united." Every small act of compassion counted. Vyre walked nightly among the people, offering words of encouragement, ensuring the guards stayed vigilant but kind. Morale gradually lifted. One shadowed evening, Vyre came across a hunched elderly woman scrabbling through trash for scraps of food. Heart clenched, he gently drew her into the royal kitchens to dine on fresh bread and stew. Once revived, she clasped Vyre's hand with bony fingers. "Bless you, your majesty," she warbled. "You've reminded this stubborn fool to hope." Her renewed smile was all the reward Vyre desired. When citizens quarreled over petty matters, he mediated patiently until wrath became understanding. If he heard a child cry out in the night, Vyre rushed to soothe their nightmares, replacing fear with comfort. Slowly, spirits softened and lifted. But one matter still confounded the king: the absence of an heir with Mariel after so many years. 3 cycles of the moon had passed since she conceived, yet she had not quickened. Fearing the worst, Vyre nervously broached visiting the human physicians. But his wise queen gave a small, strange smile. "No mortal man may say what grows within me now," she declared. "Our child echoes with ancient magic, bound to neither mortal realm." Unsure whether her words were mere wishes, Vyre simply embraced his love, praying her instincts spoke truth. This child would unite their kinds wholly if born safe and thriving. Their mystery persisted over subsequent moons. Mariel grew round and vibrant, eating strange cravings for blood oranges and raw meat. Vyre brought her medicinal incenses and massaged her feet nightly. All they could do was wait in hope. On the eve of winter's first frost, Mariel gave a small gasp as they dined. "The time is now, my love," she said calmly. Heart racing, Vyre carried her carefully to the birthing suite. But uncertainty clouded him. What did he know of delivering infants, especially ones that defied nature's laws? Servants propped Mariel's bed with pillows and brought hot water, clean linens. Drawing a chair to her side, Vyre clasped her hand and let her grip guide him. Her breathing turned deep and steady between contractions rippling across her belly. Outside, snow swirled beneath a full moon as night crept toward dawn. Mariel labored on serenely through the hours, occasionally sipping vials of sanguinum Vyre handed her. As the sky's black depths began fading to grey, she gave a small cry and one final push. Wailing pierced the hush, and the midwife lifted a healthy baby into her hands, a girl with skin moon-pale but flushed pink, born of both realms. Emotion flooded Vyre as she was settled onto Mariel's chest. Their daughter had arrived, impossibly, beautifully alive. Trumpets instantly sounded through the city proclaiming the miraculous news. In minutes the suite was flooded with jubilant well-wishers, humans and vampires alike overcome with joy at this union of their kinds. Gazing reverently at his daughter's tiny face, Vyre knew she represented the peace they had all built together. In a grand cathedral draped with flowers, leaders from across the land gathered for the presentation of the royal baby. Bells pealed and choirs sang as Vyre and Meriel appeared cradling their child. A hushed reverence fell over the crowd. "Behold, Princess Lucia, heiress of dawn and dusk," Vyre proclaimed. A deafening cheer resounded for the future queen. At last, Vyre realized fully, their two worlds were bound eternally as one. In the ancient tradition of his people, Vyre next carried tiny Lucia before the stone of sight handed down from the first vampire elders. Bathed in moonlight, the pale crystal would reveal the destiny of those it gazed upon. Breath held, Vyre watched its milky color shift to a warm radiant gold, the hue foretelling a life that would bring prosperity and accord. Joyful tears stung Vyre's eyes. His daughter was destined to lead their peoples into a new era of love. Of course, many trails lay ahead before her reign could begin. But Lucia would never walk them alone. As Vyre cradled the gurgling child in his chambers, he swore to her, "You are the light we have all awaited, our future queen. Your mother and I will be with you always." The infant cooed and nestled into her father's strong embrace. Vyre's unbeating heart overflowed with blissful purpose. Darkness would always challenge their harmony, but they would face it together, and see luminosity dawn again and again. Chapter 15. In the idyllic months after Lucia's birth, Vyre was consumed with doting on his daughter. The kingdom rejoiced to see their little princess cradled lovingly by both her human mother and vampire father. Though only a babe, Lucia embodied the realm's unity. Vyre sat enthralled watching her every expression and squeal. Her delighted giggles when he pulled silly faces made his chest feel near to bursting. Even Meriel laughed at finding Vyre sprawled asleep in the nursery after playing gently with Lucia deep into dawn. "Rest, my dear. Our girl will need you in the nights ahead," Meriel whispered, kissing Vyre's brow. Vyre grinned sheepishly before retiring to bed. He felt so humbled seeing a life he had helped create. The palace halls now echoed with the pattering of tiny feet once Lucia began toddling about. She squeaked eagerly at the colorful portraits and statues along the corridors. Vyre nearly lost his wits when she escaped her nursemaid and managed to climb atop the back of his prized mare in the stables. But he could only chuckle seeing her beaming proudly atop the gentle horse. Lucia's boundless curiosity was a constant source of warmth and worry as she explored her expanding world. During meetings in his solar, Vyre often paused hearing her giggle just outside the door as she evaded her tutors. But he had not the heart to scold a girl who looked at all things with wide-eyed fascination. Let her enjoy these carefree years, Vyre thought. Yet his joy was not without gnawing fears. Would prejudice rear its head again as his daughter grew? Could the shadowy remnants scattered across the land threaten her future? Whenever such worries crept into Vyre's mind, he simply sat beside Lucia's crib listening to her dreamy sighs, letting her tiny hand curl around his finger. All his fretting melted away then. He had to trust in the goodness their people had chosen. When Lucia turned 5, Vyre decided it was time to show her more of the kingdom she would one day rule. Hoisting her excited form onto his shoulders, he carried her through the sunlit castle courtyards where people bowed respectfully at their presence. Lucia waved merrily at the passers-by while clutching her stuffed wolf toy. Vyre next walked with her through the bustling city streets, pointing out shops and taverns. Lucia gasped at the expanse of the open-air markets with their dizzying aromas and colors. She dragged Vyre eagerly from stall to sample breads and fruits. Seeing the vendors beam proudly at the charming princess, Vyre's heart swelled. Their peoples were uniting through little acts of joy each day. As dusk fell, Vyre lifted Lucia onto his horse to ride slowly across the countryside so she could glimpse farm life. They trotted past verdant pastures and orchards glowing under the sunset. Lucia cried out excitedly when fireflies began to twinkle in the receding light. The farmers they passed tipped their hats warmly, calling out blessings for the princess. By the time Vyre carried his drowsy, content daughter back to the castle, his feet felt light. She had delighted in everything their realm had to offer. Let her always see its beauty, he prayed. Shadows might threaten, but he had to trust their people would stand strong as guardians of the light. At Lucia's first birthday ball, nobles from all races fawned over the exuberant little princess in her lace gown. Vyre and Meriel beamed proudly as she flitted between the guests, grinning and curtsying clumsily. Music filled the glittering hall as ladies offered to dance with the princess, whirling gently with her in their arms. But Vyre's breath caught when Lord Garrick Blackstone approached with his family. Time had mellowed the former dissenter, but prejudice lurked under the surface. Yet Garrick simply bowed and said solemnly, "She has your spirit, Majesty. Our future is bright indeed." Lucia shyly offered the imposing lord a flower, and his stern face softened into something genuine. Vyre exchanged an amazed, hopeful look with Meriel. If even Garrick's heart could change, others would surely follow. As he later carried a sleeping Lucia to the nursery, still clutching her flower gift, Vyre sent up a prayer of thanks. His daughter's loving spirit was their people's redemption. Hardships were inevitable, but her light would guide them through. Vyre could ask nothing more of his life than to nurture her tender soul until the day her reign began. Chapter 16. As Princess Lucia grew into an inquisitive, tender-hearted child, Vyre made sure she received rigorous tutoring for her future rule. But he balanced her hours poring over dull histories and etiquette with playtime romping through the gardens. Laughter was a key lesson too. Lucia proved a quick study at her languages and sums, devouring books ravenously. Yet she questioned the discrimination and conflict described in the histories. "Why must we be so different?" she asked sadly one night. Vyre drew her into a hug. "Because we fear what we do not understand," he explained. "But you can teach our kingdom openness and empathy." When Lucia turned 16, suitors predictably began flocking to court her. But Vyre refused all the arrogant, superficial princelings paraded before him. His daughter deserved true affection. To his surprise, Lucia made her choice at a summer solstice masquerade. Vyre was mingling pleasantly with guests in the torchlit pavilion when he caught sight of Lucia, illuminated by lanterns, dancing with a handsome young man in a wolf mask. As Vyre moved closer, he saw the depth of their gaze, the genuine joy in Lucia's smile. When the dance ended, Lucia brought the shy lad over. "Father, meet Eric, from the village near our northern castle." As they removed their masks, her pure bliss was plain. And when Eric respectfully asked Vyre's permission to court Lucia, looking upon his gentle, earnest face, Vyre could find no objection. In the romantic weeks that followed, Vyre often glimpsed the couple strolling the moonlit gardens, laughing together as they tended the roses. Seeing his daughter so happy brought Vyre immense comfort. Eric was of humble birth, but his good heart mattered far more. Eric proved his nobility through valiant deeds protecting Lucia on rides beyond the city from highwaymen and savage beasts. His refined manner in court also won over skeptical nobles until Vyre gladly consented to their betrothal. On an enchanted midsummer night, Eric and Lucia were wed in the forest glen where they had shared their first kiss. Cherry blossoms swirled around the lovers as they exchanged joyful vows. Vyre watched misty-eyed beside Meriel as the young pair sealed their union with an ardent kiss. In the ensuing months of calm, the kingdom flourished. Farmers reaped abundant harvests and master craftsmen perfected their arts. Vyre was gladdened to see once rival human and vampire artisans collaborate harmoniously. But darkness still scuttled in remote shadows. Rumors reached the king of strange rituals occurring in lightless caverns beyond the borderlands. Whispers spoke of alliances with infernal forces against the United Realms. But no proof could be found of these evils. Soon after Lucia joyfully announced she carried Eric's child, tragedy struck the kingdom. While riding in the forest, Eric was pierced through the eye by a poisoned arrow. Lucia found his body under the boughs of the tree they had often lain beneath gazing at stars. Her anguished screams echoed through the wood. Vyre wept bitterly over the kind-hearted Eric's coffin before it was entombed. Lucia withdrew into herself, consumed by grief even as she grew round with Eric's unborn child. Not even this joy could pierce her gloom. She snapped coldly at concerned Vyre and Meriel's efforts to console her. But Vyre understood such sorrow must run its course. "We shall get through this together," he whispered outside her door each night. He only prayed the light would return to Lucia's eyes someday. They must not surrender to the darkness. The kingdom held its breath awaiting word of Lucia's difficult birth. After long, harrowing hours, the princess was finally delivered of a healthy baby girl. A herald announced the news to a gathered anxious crowd. Fresh anguish crushed Vyre when told Lucia had no desire to see her child. But this could not stand swallowing sorrow. Vyre carried the squirming babe to Lucia's bedside. Gently pulling back the drapes, he placed the baby into her mother's limp arms. "Your daughter, Lucia," he implored. "Our people's hope." Lucia's dull gaze hesitantly lowered to the fussing baby. As the child's tiny hand grasped her finger, Lucia's hollow eyes filling with light once more. Love flowed back into her broken heart at last. Chapter 17. In the bittersweet months after Lucia's daughter Elena was born, the princess was consumed with caring for her child. Though she still grieved Eric deeply, the baby gave her light purpose again. Vyre and Meriel assisted with the many trials of new parenthood, walking the halls, bouncing little Elena through bouts of colic, fetching extra blankets when she kicked them off in the night. Lucia smiled weakly seeing them fuss over the child, grateful for their support. "She has Eric's curious eyes," Lucia murmured one day as the baby peered intently around the nursery. Vyre gently squeezed his daughter's shoulder, heart aching for her. Lucia found some solace in passing on Eric's strength and compassion to young Elena through stories as she grew. On visits to Vyre's castle, Elena would rush to the throne room and beg Papa Vyre for tales of her brave father. Vyre gladly regaled the child with accounts of Eric's deeds that always left her beaming proudly. Lucia looked on tenderly, though sadness still veiled her smile. When Elena was 5, energetic and constantly underfoot, Lucia decided it was time for her to see all the kingdom had to offer, as Vyre had once shown his own daughter. Though initially wary of anything unfamiliar, Elena's cautious nature soon gave way to awe and delight traveling her first country roads. Lucia lifted her onto their horse to watch farmers haying fields in the sun's dying light. The workers paused to wave as little Elena shouted excited greetings that made them chuckle. Lucia smiled softly, warmed to see sparks of Eric's spirit within their vibrant child. At a bustling village market, the smells of fresh breads and spices drew delighted gasps from Elena. Lucia let herself be tugged by the hand from stall to stall as the girl circled wide-eyed, enraptured by everything. When Elena tripped, a kind red-headed shop boy helped her up. "Thank you," Elena exclaimed, beaming innocently. Lucia laughed, brushing a tear away. As they rode home beneath the rising crescent moon, Elena babbled happily about all she had seen, full of renewed marvel at the world. Cradling the drowsy child, Lucia felt Eric close. Bittersweet joy warmed her weary heart. She would make sure their daughter saw every light and wonder this realm held. On Elena's 6th birthday, the palace rang with delighted squeals and scampering feet as she played with a pack of rambunctious village children invited by Lucia. Watching Elena skip and sing without a care, Lucia's smile held a glimmer that had been absent since her beloved Eric's death. Seeing Lucia glow again was the greatest gift imaginable for Vyre. But Elena's carefree years could not last. As sole heir to the kingdom, her preparation must begin. With patience and creativity, Vyre and the tutors imparted her first history and etiquette lessons while letting the restless girl take frequent breaks to run and play. In the evenings, Lucia combed Elena's hair and whispered how one day she would be a wise, compassionate queen. The child listened with somber eyes that understood. On the anniversary of Eric's death, Elena asked Vyre if the darkness had truly been defeated. Sighing, he answered truthfully, "Shadows persist, but we must keep faith in the light, as your father did." Nodding solemnly, Elena squeezed Vyre's hand. At Elena's first dance lesson, the energy and grace with which she spun across the ballroom left Vyre stunned. Eric's agility lived on within the laughing girl. When Elena was presented at court on her 16th birthday, her poise and quick intelligence impressed the nobles. Though still innocent, Elena had become an elegant young woman both human and vampire realms could take pride in. Vyre beamed as her subjects gazed at their future queen with open love. Yet around that same year, troubling rumors swirled of a vampire lord in the far northern mountains building an army of some dark design. Patrols sent to investigate never returned. An ancient evil was stirring, and Elena's light could draw its wrath. Fearing for his descendants as his own strength waned, Vyre knew his final duty: to quell this threat before his heir took the throne. Even if it meant journeys into shadow his aged bones no longer relished. Sometimes, light must be cradled in steady hands and carried courageously into darkness. Chapter 18. Haunted by ominous rumors from the north, Vyre made ready to seek answers, refusing to leave such perils for his heir. But when he confided his plans to Lucia and Meriel, their dismay was plain. "You needn't carry every burden alone, my love," Meriel implored, clasping Vyre's hands. Lucia knelt earnestly. "Father, let me go in your stead. This quest is too perilous for you now." Vyre smiled sadly at their concern. "You both have given me more joy than any soul could hope for," he said thickly. "But a king must ever defend his people while strength remains. I ride at dusk." Their protests did not sway Vyre as he donned his old armor that evening. Before departing, he bid his sleeping granddaughter a silent farewell, praying she would rule in days of peace. With his most loyal warriors at his side, Vyre ventured north through the ominous woodlands toward the cold mountains looming in perpetual mist. Nights passed around cramped campfires where Vyre rallied his comrades' spirits with ballads of past glory. But the steep crags ahead harbored only eerie silence and strange blue fires gleaming within the fog. One grey dawn, Vyre realized the loyal vampire Elias had vanished from the camp. Tracking his horse's tracks to a ravine, Vyre's blood went cold. A massive cocoon of webbing hung from the gorge's sheer walls. And Elias's torn clothes lay discarded on the ground below. This was no earthly creature's work. Pressing on grimly, they soon reached a sheer obsidian gate barring entry to a carved causeway. There could be only one domain beyond. Vyre's fears were confirmed when a patrol of armored vampires with icy eyes emerged from the mist. "Turn back, trespassers," their leader droned. "Lord Argent does not suffer the living." Vyre drew his sword. "I come seeking truth. Stand aside." The vampires did not waver. "None pass. Return, or your quest ends here." Vyre exhaled slowly, then nodded. As one, his warriors drew blades and advanced on the stoic patrol. Steel rang against steel as they clashed, driving their emotionless foes back toward the foreboding gate. Vyre's old limbs strained bitterly, but his sword arm remembered its purpose against these pawns of evil. Gasping victory cries went up as the last opponent fell. But many loyal lives had been sacrificed in that vicious melee. With grim resolve, Vyre led the survivors through the now unguarded gate toward whatever awaited within the veiled mountain. They crept into a vast cavern city unlike any Vyre had known. Cold blue flames illuminated empty streets and imposing spiked architecture. The only sounds were the frozen wind howling through corrupted spires. Whatever souls dwelled here were long bereft of warmth and spirit. Vyre shuddered. Through the ashen haze, he glimpsed a towering fortress carved from the mountain itself looming at the heart of that bleak metropolis. Vyre unfurled his cloak emblazoned with the royal crest. "With dignity we march," he whispered. "Let no darkness stealing your souls as it has stolen others. Forward, friends!" They proceeded undaunted through the dead city with chins held high. At the massive iron doors to the citadel, Vyre pounded the hilt of his sword until the metal rang out. The doors slowly groaned inward, spewing plumes of frigid mist from whatever lay within. Vyre's aged heart trembled, but he stepped solemnly across the threshold without hesitation. His men followed unflinchingly. As the vapor cleared, an unsettling scene lay before them: a towering skeletal lord seated on an obsidian throne. He wore an iron crown and flowing robes white as bone, but his eyes were bottomless black voids. Vyre's pulse raced. This could only be Argent himself. The dreadful figure spoke, his voice soft yet echoing as from the depths of a cavern. So, the old king comes to my dominion at last. State your intrusion. Vyre stood tall. I come seeking your intentions, dread lord. Why do your forces stir in the mortal realms? Argent seemed to muse darkly. This peace you and your misbegotten clan nurtured is but a passing dream. Chaos shall reign again ere long. He leaned forward with malice. All thrones topple eventually, even yours. Rage boiled within Vyre, but he hid it behind courtly tact. By what right would you threaten my dynasty or bring strife between our kinds and you? Argent's lipless grin made Vyre's skin crawl. The right of might. For too long vampires have debased themselves serving mortal cattle. But my legion shall scour your failed experiment from the land. His eyes blazed with sneering menace. Then creatures like you will learn your rightful place beneath my boots. Vyre exhaled slowly. This dark lord could not be dissuaded from his vision of dominance and purging. Diplomacy was useless now. He gazed upon each of his warriors' brave faces with solemn pride, knowing what he must sacrifice for their future peace. So be it, Vyre pronounced. With blazing eyes locked on the skeletal kings, he raised his blade and charged the throne, his loyal men racing beside him with courageous bellows. Argent hissed vile incantations, unleashing waves of life-draining magic that brought Vyre's warriors to their knees, shriveling into desiccated husks before his horror-struck eyes. But Vyre fought onward, blade singing with righteous fury. Argent rose from his throne, claws unsheathed and black robes writhing with summoned spirits. The two clashed in a titanic struggle that shook the hall's foundations, ancient magic against undying hope. Vyre felt death's icy grip closing as his strength failed. But Argent's claws had not claimed his spirit. With a last prayer for his family's safety, he plunged his sword through the Dark Lord's throat before the endless abyss took him. Falling into darkness, Vyre's life did not flash before his eyes. He simply felt at peace knowing his bloodline would endure in the light, whatever threats loomed. They would face the shadows as bravely as he had. With that solace cradling his soul, the great king let oblivion embrace him. And so passed Vyre windsworn, sovereign of day and night. But his legacy lived on in every united soul. Chapter 19. A pall of mourning hung over the kingdom after brave King Vyre's tragic demise. But Lucia knew that grief must wait, seating her daughter Elena on the throne safely must come first, before opportunists tried seizing power. On the day she came of age, Elena knelt solemnly beneath the stained glass windows in the royal cathedral as the crown was placed upon her brow. Trumpets proclaimed her while courtiers bowed deeply, accepting their new queen. Lucia watched tearfully, seeing her father's spirit in Elena's kind but resolute eyes. After the coronation, Elena retreated to her private chambers and wept for the grandfather she had lost. Lucia grieved with her, but knew Vyre's legacy must be honored. Elena must be the compassionate leader their people deserved. At her first address to the court, Elena stood tall and encouraged all take solace in Vyre's victory over evil, though dearly bought. Murmurs of admiration rippled through the gathered nobles at her poise. Lucia nodded firmly despite her swelling emotion. Inevitably, grumblings came from some vampire lords that no human could ever properly rule their kingdom. But Elena quelled dissent with humility, asking how best to understand their people's needs. Many saw past prejudice to embrace her sincerity. Yet Lucia still sensed lingering unease in the elder vampire's eyes. Her concerns were justified when several outspoken moderate vampire lords who supported Elena perished in suspicious accidents. Soon after, while dedicating a memorial to her grandfather, an arrow narrowly missed striking Elena's heart. Lucia rushed to shield her terrified daughter from further projectiles. Back in the safety of the castle, Elena collapsed into her mother's arms. "Why do they scorn me so?" she wept bitterly. Lucia stroked her hair. "Not all do, my heart. But hatred is not easily purged from ancient minds." Lucia knew security must be strengthened quickly to protect her vulnerable child. On the advice of generals, Garrisons were established outside vampire settlements. Elena sent aid generously to these regions, hoping to gentle their mistrust. Slowly, some minds opened to her good faith. But others stewed in resentment. One tense night, Elena and Lucia dined privately, confined for safety to the castle. Sipping blood wine, Elena confided her deepening isolation. "I wish I could show them my spirit as grandfather did," she murmured. Lucia took her hand. "In time, through compassion, you shall." After the meal, Elena bid her mother good night and retired to her chambers. But Lucia was racked by a strange sudden sense of dread. Moving urgently to her daughter's room, her alarm grew, finding the doors oddly ajar. Creeping inside, a cry of horror escaped her. Elena was gone. On the blacked windows was a bloody glyph, the vampire radical's insignia. Lucia sank to her knees in despairing prayer. Surrounded by enemies, how could her beloved daughter survive this evil? For 3 nights, Lucia desperately prayed and strategized with advisors. She knew the rebels would not hesitate to eliminate Elena, destroying Vyre's line. Lucia nearly went mad imagining her child's terror. Then a breathless messenger arrived with incredible news: Elena had escaped her captors and fled into the southern farmlands. She had left a trail of small clues only her closest loved ones would recognize. "Ready the horses!" Lucia cried with relief. She rallied a modest search party of those she trusted implicitly: Cain, her old friend, and Elena's human playmate Clara from the village. Under the crescent moon, they ventured south following Elena's signals. A torn yellow ribbon on a bramble marked the forest path they must take. Melted candles dripped on cow pens showed the farms they passed. Finally, a tiny drawing of a wolf on a barn door made Lucia weep with joy. Inside, they found Elena bruised but alive, collapsed in a stall. Lucia rushed to embrace her precious daughter. Elena recounted boldly fleeing her cell through the dungeons amidst the chaos of a shift change among her inept guards. The child's bravery and resourcefulness left Lucia in awe. "My bright brave girl," she praised. "Now we depart swiftly, before those villains track us here." Lucia decided it was no longer safe to return to the castle immediately. Securing a room at a remote village inn, she comforted the exhausted Elena as her wounds were tended to. Then they all got some desperately needed rest. When Lucia awoke at dusk, she was heartened to find Elena already dressing herself gingerly. There was renewed resolve in her eyes. "I cannot hide in shadows," Elena declared. "Grandfather stood against darkness. Now I must do the same." Lucia wished desperately to protect her, but knew Elena spoke wisdom. Pressing a kiss to her head, she prayed for courage they would both need. Soon they departed for the capital, and whatever lay ahead. Elena refused to be intimidated upon returning to court, appearing publicly each night to reassure her supporters. She spoke passionately of continuing her grandfather's open and peaceful reign. Many were moved, but an undercurrent of uncertainty remained. One tense evening, after giving a rousing address on unity to the court, Elena turned to leave and found Lord Avalain blocking her exit. The formidable grey-haired vampire stared down his nose at her. "Strong words, child," he said coldly. "But the faith of our people cannot rest on one so young." He stepped closer. "Stand aside. I shall rule until you come of age." Lucia rushed forward protectively, but Elena halted her with a glance. The girl boldly met the imposing lord's stare. "I may be young, but know well the needs of all citizens, human or vampire," Elena pronounced regally. "And I will not abandon my duty to any threat born of fear or hate." For an uncomfortable moment, Avalain bristled ominously. Then incredibly, he sank slowly to one knee before the brave young queen. A hushed gasp rippled through the chamber. "If you possess even a fraction your grandfather's spirit, then there is hope yet," Avalain rumbled. Murmurs of amazement spread as the emboldened court also knelt before Elena. Lucia watched with proud tears as the rightful queen received her people's reverent loyalty at last. Dark schemes surely still stirred beyond the castle walls. But Lucia's heart swelled seeing Elena's courage igniting faith once more. This daughter of two worlds would lead them all back to the light, as Vyre always knew she could. Chapter 20. In the moons after Elena took the throne, the kingdom remained uneasy. Though many accepted the new queen's compassionate leadership, threats still lurked in shadows. Rumors spread of radical vampires practicing black magic and building forces in the bleak, dead marshes to the west. But proofs were elusive. All scouts sent to investigate disappeared into the mist. Left unchecked though, this darkness could fester and consume Elena's delicate bonds. So when the queen proposed personally venturing into the marshes seeking answers, her council was outraged. Elena patiently weathered their objections. "Your lives matter most to me," she said earnestly. "But a ruler must know when to extend trust." Unable to dissuade the idealistic young queen, the court reluctantly sanctioned her quest. After tearful farewells with Lucia, Elena gathered 24 of her staunchest royal guards and advisors and journeyed west toward the foreboding wetlands. With heavy hearts, Lucia and the court could only await her return. Elena's party trekked 3 days through increasingly fetid and treacherous terrain. In the permanent dreary twilight beneath the gnarled black trees, the only sounds were bubbling muck and faint skittering shadows at the edge of vision. But Elena encouraged her unsettled protectors with rousing songs and enthusiasm that never wavered. At last they reached the marsh's heart, a gloomy moor veiled in sickly mist. But suddenly torches flared through the haze, illuminating dozens of pale faces and silver arrow tips aimed their way from all sides. Elena stepped forward placatingly. "We come in peace, friends. Together we can dash." A bolt whistled past her head in warning. "Lies," a voice bellowed from the darkness. "Your reign ends here, false queen." Before her horrified guards could react, black tentacles erupted from the bog, coiling around Elena and dragging her screaming into the filthy depths. The ambushers fired a final volley to cover their escape, then disappeared into the mist, leaving only death and silence. Frantic hours passed as the surviving men tried in vain to rescue Elena from the bottomless marsh. But soon her protector Lord Devin emerged solemnly carrying only her torn and muddied garments. "We have lost our queen," he said hoarsely. The despairing party made the bitter journey back, bringing the disastrous news to a shattered Lucia and court. As Elena's candlelight vigil commenced, Lucia collapsed into inconsolable weeping. Her sweet child was truly gone, stolen by monsters. As moon turned to moon, the kingdom languished leaderless, lawless and brittle. Vicious infighting broke out between vampire and human villagers over meager resources. Rogue bands staged brazen raids at will. The people cried out desperately for salvation. "A ruler must be chosen before we descend into chaos," Lord Avalain bellowed in a disastrous emergency council session. Other lords shouted over him advocating their own suitability, or refuting lifelong rivals. Lost in helpless grief over her daughter, Lucia paid little heed to the bickering nobles. But gradually, an absurd thought stirred. She was blood of Vyre's noble line too, could she dare claim the crown herself? Overwhelmed but resolute, Lucia suddenly stood tall before the frenzied lords. "Enough," she cried. "Your quarreling shames my daughter's memory. I shall take the throne." Stunned silence met her pronouncement. Then Avalain's shrewd gaze turned thoughtful. "So be it," he rumbled. Other lords quickly echoed their assent, united for now against uncertainty. The very next night, surrounded by tense nobles and exhausted citizens, Lucia underwent hurried coronation rites to formally crown her queen of the realm at last. As the ancient diadem settled onto her brow, she whispered a prayer to Elena for strength. Over the following weeks, Lucia worked desperately to salvage flickering bonds between the kingdoms. Though intimidated by bloodlusting vampire war chiefs and wrathful human mobs alike, she faced them with patience and care. Through resolve to heal, not punish, many restless hearts softened to her words. But vicious and powerful forces plotting the regime's downfall could not be gently dissuaded. One moonless night, Lucia's own Praetorian guards dragged before her a vampire assassin caught scaling the castle walls, daggers drawn. Lacking evidence of who had sent him, Lucia reluctantly ordered the man hanged. Justice prevailed, but bitterness festered. Soon the scattered attacks could no longer be ignored. As Lucia surveyed maps in the war room, Lord Avelaine reported grimly, "The storms come for us, Your Majesty. Our enemies rally in the rending mountains." Lucia set her mouth firmly, knowing the time for peace was past. "Then we go to meet them." 3 nights later, Lucia rode forth to intercept the vast rebel army approaching from the north in a great convoy with knights, wagons laden with silver arms, and hundreds of volunteer soldiers. Beneath the sickly green aurora light swirling overhead, Lucia addressed her forces overlooking the enemy's torchlit ranks gathered below in the valley. "You fight today not for hatred," she called, "but for the lasting unity my daughter dreamed of. Stand fast." At first light, war cries rang out from both sides as they clashed violently. Lucia kept her steed back from the carnage, exchanging arrows with enemy archers and batting aside hurled axes. She rallied her weary warriors until her voice went hoarse. As the day wore on and casualties mounted, the rebel forces gradually crumbled until their leaders finally fled, leaving their dead behind. Weeping with relief, Lucia embraced her courageous soldiers one by one. Though victory was theirs this time, the future remained imperiled. Returning heavy-hearted to the capital, Lucia passed shrouded bodies on pyres and knew both sides had lost beloved souls. She prayed desperately for wisdom to break this twisted cycle of violence and suspicion Elena had sought to heal. Later, alone at her daughter's candlelit shrine, Lucia wept for the hatred that lived on. "Help me end this, my child," she entreated softly. No miraculous answer came. But Lucia looked upon Elena's radiant painted face and recalled her unwavering compassion. Gently, she understood the path ahead. Darkness would always test them, but light must keep faith. At the next council session, Lucia drew shocked gasps proposing not vengeance against sympathizers, but reconciliation. Citing Elena's example, she spoke passionately until the lords nodded solemnly. The people's faith would be restored through hope, not fear. Thereafter, Lucia made weekly visits to destitute villages ravaged by conflict, distributing food and medicine. These gestures of goodwill slowly mended weary hearts. And seeing their queen's humble caring led many to follow her lead. Cooperation blossomed once more. On the anniversary of her coronation, Lucia addressed a crowd of humans and vampires united again in Tradesburg Square. "Though darkness still haunts us," she proclaimed, "my daughter's dream shall never perish while we keep its light alive in our hearts. That is my vow to you all." And so harmony endured under Queen Lucia's patient rule. Generations hence sang of her selfless reign that salvaged a dream from sorrow's ashes. The light still burned within their kingdom of unity.